Dia, meus amigos, hoje, domingo 27 de agosto de 2023, no horário de Brasília, 8 horas e 11 minutos. Iniciamos nesse momento mais uma transmissão em nosso canal UPTV para trazer para vocês, então, a parte da aproximação e acoplagem da tripulação da CREW-7 na Estação Espacial Internacional, que está prevista, então, para acontecer às 10h11 da manhã, no horário de Brasília. Hoje então vamos acompanhar. E hoje então vamos acompanhar tudo isso ao vivo aqui para vocês. Lembrando que o lançamento da CREW-7, né, foi realizado ontem, na madrugada de ontem, às 4h27 da manhã, na plataforma 39A do Centro Espacial Kennedy dos Estados Unidos. Né? Então ontem a gente acompanhou todos os movimentos então dos procedimentos para o lançamento. Né? E hoje nós vamos acompanhar então a parte da aproximação e acoplagem, né, da tripulação então da CREW-7, né, que está prevista aí para acontecer às 10h11 da manhã. E logo mais à noite, eu tinha comentado ontem em transmissão que era às 9h25, mas não, é mais cedo, tá? A transmissão então para a missão lá do Japão, lá com o veículo H2, começa então a partir das 20h50 da noite. Tá? Então aí vamos acompanhar a missão Slim, lá direto então da base de Tanegashima, no Japão. A partir das 20h50 da noite. Quem está chegando agora, né? Sejam todos bem-vindos. Meu nome então é William Pessoa, então vamos acompanhar aí juntos a parte então da aproximação e acoplagem da CREW-7. Quem estiver chegando também, aí não esqueça de deixar o like na transmissão. E quem ainda não se inscreveu no canal, se inscreva aí no canal e segue também a gente nas redes sociais aí para não perder nenhum detalhe então da programação aí da semana. Que também nessa semana agora que chega, né? Dia 29, vamos ter então o lançamento aí com a Atlas 5, né? Direto então do Cabo Canaveral, do complexo de lançamento número 41 aí com a missão Noro 107, tá? Então, dia 29. Não percam. Bom dia, meu amigo. Seja bem-vindo aí à nossa transmissão novamente, né? Seja muito bem-vindo. É bom que você gostou aí da transmissão. Fico feliz aí que você tenha gostado de ontem, da transmissão de ontem, né? Que você tenha retornado também aí. Estamos aguardando só o contato lá com a Estação Espacial Internacional, né? E também com o centro de controle em Houston e também com o centro de controle na Califórnia da SpaceX. Daqui a pouquinho então vamos iniciar aí a transmissão em conjunto com a NASA e SpaceX. Então lembrando que a acoplagem está prevista aí para acontecer às 10h15 da manhã, a abertura da escotilha e a cerimônia a partir então das 10h30 da manhã. E aí, portanto, já iniciamos a transmissão em conjunto então com a NASA e SpaceX nesse momento. Então, nesse momento, 8 horas e 15 minutos. Agora virou para 16. Estamos iniciando a transmissão agora oficial em conjunto com a NASA e Spacex. Para então a gente acompanhar a parte da aproximação e acoplagem da Dragon Endeavour aí com a tripulação da CREW-7 na Estação Espacial Internacional. E aí, portanto, já temos imagens ao vivo então da Estação Espacial Internacional, aí aguardando então o visual da Dragon.
Furukawa and Konstantin Borisov.
Estamos então ao vivo, então direto da Califórnia aí com a centro de controle da SpaceX.
We are just under a couple hours away from the final approach and docking of Dragon to the International Space Station. The crew is awake and ready to monitor the final steps, so let's recap the mission thus far.
Launch day preparations started early for our crew members. About 4 hours prior to launch, the crew completed their final medical checks.
Então, estamos revendo os momentos do que aconteceu ontem, na madrugada de ontem, com a parte então, do lançamento do Falcon 9, então, com a Dragon. Lembrando que eles vão ficar então a bordo da Estação Espacial Internacional por 6 meses, né? E durante este tempo, além das caminhadas espaciais que eles irão realizar, eles irão aí conduzir mais de 200 experimentos, né, que estão na Estação Espacial Internacional.
At 3:27 a.m. Eastern Time, 12:27 a.m. Pacific, the 9 Merlin 1D engines ignited and
então,
Falcon
estamos
9
revendo aí
lifted
momentos
off from Space Launch
do
Complex
lançamento, né, que
39A,
aconteceu
marking
ontem,
the 11th time humans rode Dragon
complexo de
into orbit.
lançamento então número
With
39A,
Falcon 9 first stage at full
Centro
power,
Espacial
our crew
Kennedy,
began
na
their
Flórida,
journey
nos
to
Estados
the
Unidos, às
International Space Station.
4h27
Just
da manhã no
after
horário de
9
Brasília, então
minutes,
aconteceu
the first stage
o lançamento
landed
então
at
da
landing
tripulação
zone
da
1 and a
CREW-7.
couple minutes.
Have you 5x5, Jaws?
Temos aí então o nosso primeiro contato novamente aí com a Dragon SpaceX.
Loud and clear, Jaws. How me?
E, portanto, temos a tela dividida com a Califórnia e com o centro de controle em Houston. Estamos aguardando imagens da Estação Espacial retornar, né? Como vocês podem perceber, estamos em período então de blackout de comunicação, de vídeo.
That sounds amazing. I love it.
Love to hear that. So that was a lot of different voices, and you heard the term the big loop. So the big loop is up. That means this is a communication path from the ground to Dragon and the International Space Station and Hawthorne and Mission Control Houston. So everybody can talk on the same loop at this point. We will be entering integrated operations pretty soon.
Então já estamos aí acompanhando ao vivo então a parte do início então dos procedimentos de aproximação com a Estação Espacial Internacional. Então, lembrando que a acoplagem está prevista para acontecer às 10h11 da manhã. Então, aí está o diagrama, né, de como vai acontecer a parte da aproximação. Então, lembrando que esta primeira parte então já está acontecendo agora.
The boost burn put our crew in an orbit where Dragon's apogee, or the highest point, will be 10 kilometers lower than the station. After that, we executed the close co-elliptic burn
E aí depois,
at
novamente, né, eles vão ganhar
Pacific time.
Aí a parte então de subida de órbita, né?
Roughly co-elliptic
A
with
parte
the
então
space
daí
station, meaning it was maintaining
primeira
an
fase
orbit
de
roughly 10 kilometers lower than the station the
ganho
entire
de
way
velocidade,
around
né?
the Earth.
Que eles vão fazer.
That's in contrast to only
Aí
being
nessa
10
fase de
kilometers
queima
lower
de
than the
motor,
station
né?
during Dragon's
Aí depois eles
apogee,
vão
or the
ganhar
highest
mais
point in its orbit,
subida
which is
de órbita a
achieved by the
cada
booster.
2 quilômetros.
From there, at 11:54 p.m. Pacific, we executed the fourth major maneuver known as the
E aí
transfer
vamos
burn.
acompanhar então
This is
todo esse
where we raise
procedimento
Dragon's
de
apogee at the
aproximação
highest point of its orbit
e
to just
acoplagem.
2.5 kilometers lower than the station. Then we rounded everything out with a final co-elliptic burn at 12:41 a.m. Pacific to once again maintain a constant orbit lower than the station, this time just that 2.5 kilometers below. This is a shorter burn lasting just over 30 seconds. So now we are getting into the approach initiation and final stages of Dragon's rendezvous with the space station. This is also when we start those integrated operations
Então lembrando que o
between
primeiro
the Dragon
ponto,
control team here
aí
at
quando a gente
Hawthorne
chegar então
and
já
the
na
Space Station
Estação
Flight
Espacial
Controllers in
Internacional,
Mission
né,
Control
vamos ter
Houston. You've got them both
aí
right
3
there.
pontos
These teams will transition to the integrated
espera, né?
operations about 45 minutes prior
O
to
primeiro
approach
ponto zero,
initiation.
né, que é o que eles chamam, né, de
During the
ponto
approach,
zero,
SpaceX flight
é
controllers will work in
400
tandem with
metros,
NASA team
o
in
segundo
Houston
ponto zero é
to maneuver
200
Dragon Endurance to the
e o
proper
terceiro ponto
attitude
a
and
20
initialize the
metros
navigation
da Estação
sensors used
Espacial.
for the methodical approach to station. They'll also activate and test out a number of systems on Dragon, including bidirectional communications with the station using the C2V2 system. C2V2 stands for Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles. It sets up a data stream from Dragon to the station, giving another path for Dragon telemetry to come to the ground and giving an additional command capability to astronauts.
Estamos então aguardando o contato de vídeo, né, com a Estação Espacial Internacional.
Dragon will fire for the approach initiation burn when Dragon is about 2.5 kilometers below the station and just about 7 kilometers behind it. This will swing Dragon up until it's about a quarter mile, it's around 400 meters, directly below the station.
Que a
This
Dragon então
maneuver
vai
will also
fazer.
move Dragon inside one of 2 checkpoints around the station that requires a set of go-no-go polls with the different control teams. The first checkpoint is called the approach ellipsoid. You might hear it called the AE. This is an imaginary shape. It measures 4 kilometers
Então tá aí
by
o
2
primeiro
kilometers by 2
checkpoint, né?
kilometers.
Então
It's
será
essentially a large
aí a
three-dimensional
400
oval.
metros.
Before Dragon
É,
is
aí
given
quando
permission
chegamos
to
então aí
move
na Estação
inside the
Espacial
approach
Internacional,
ellipsoid,
né?
the capsule is
Teremos aí
configured
como
on
se
what
fosse
we call a
duas
24-hour safe
fronteiras, né?
trajectory.
Aí na
So this
estação.
means that if for some reason
É a
Dragon
primeira
lost control
fronteira
to
então a
thrusters,
400
it would
metros e
be at
depois
least
a
24 hours
200
before its
metros.
trajectory would move inside the approach ellipsoid.
The NASA and SpaceX teams will do a go-no-go poll to move Dragon inside the keep-out sphere, another checkpoint that consists of
Vamos
an
ver também
imaginary
esse
sphere around
diagrama
the
aí.
station
Vamos
with a
mostrar para
radius of
vocês.
200 meters. Flight controllers use this to monitor all arriving and departing vehicles. This is another chance to confirm all of the guidance, navigation, and control systems are working correctly on Dragon before moving closer to station. It carries a similar requirement on the orbital trajectory that if Dragon were to somehow lose control of its thrusters, it and the space station
Pelo
would be
horário de
safe
Brasília,
for
agora
orbits
são
for
8
about
horas e
6 hours,
24
rather than the
minutos.
24
Lembrando que mais
hours
tarde,
required
então, a
to
partir
enter the
das
approach
20h50 da noite,
Once Dragon arrives
nós vamos
at
então
400
acompanhar
meters
aí a
below
missão direto lá
station,
no
it
Japão,
will be
com a
at
missão
what is known
Slim.
as Waypoint 0 and will be the first checkpoint during our approach. The vehicle can hold here at 400 meters, but if all of its systems check out, it can just
Então temos aí, né, o primeiro
to approach to Waypoint
checkpoint
1.
0, né, os 400 metros da estação. Então depois o primeiro ponto a 200 metros, como eu falei, e o segundo ponto, então, checkpoint a 200 metros, a 20 metros antes do contato.
Essentially directly in front of the docking port. So the crew is headed to the Node 2 Zenith port today.
Como estamos
Dragon
vendo
has
aí
docked to
no
Node 2
diagrama.
for all of the crewed missions so far. That's where both of our international docking adapters are located. They are installed for these commercial spacecraft flights, of course, as well as any other future spacecraft that use the
Mas a
international
220
docking
metros, né?
standard.
Desculpe, não 200, é
Once Dragon is
220.
only 20 meters away at Waypoint 2, the spacecraft focuses on aligning its docking system with the International Docking Adapter. We may hear the call-out CHOP, which stands for Crew Hands-Off Point, a little less than 30 seconds before docking. At this point, any aborts will have to be done automatically by Dragon.
Of course, then we are looking forward to the grand arrival when our crew docks to the space station. Dragon will fly in and make contact with the IDA, giving us what we call soft capture. The soft capture ring will retract until sensors indicate it's time for 12 hooks to drive in place and give us the hard capture that will firmly secure Dragon to its new home on the space station. The station crew, namely NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg, will manually pressurize the vestibule. That's the area between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch. Meanwhile, umbilicals that provide power, audio, and data connections from Dragon to the station are put in place. And then it's time for leak checks and hatch opening, which we currently have timelined to come a little more than 2 hours after docking.
And let's see if we have some social questions.
So it looks like this one came in after launch. Do they have to sit like that for 30 hours? Or is there a space for them to move around? So after launch, you know, the crew does have their off-duty time period. They have the opportunity to get out of their suits and their seats. I think they're able to stow their footrests, and that gives them a little more space as well. So they're able to, of course, take in the views. I'm sure they've been doing that a lot, too.
Oh, yeah, I bet they have. And they're really only required to be inside of their seats for ascent, for any burns that are happening on the vehicle as it approaches the ISS, and then also when they return back down to Earth. Other than that,
Aí pelo horário de
they can kind of
Brasília,
enjoy the
8
space
horas
inside of Dragon.
e
Sounds
27
like a dream.
minutos.
And we
É,
are
para quem
taking
está
these
chegando aí,
questions with the
sejam todos
hashtag
bem-vindos.
AskNASA.
Estamos
So if you are
acompanhando,
on X, just use
neste
that
momento, a
hashtag.
parte de
Docking.
That was the core, so we expect to hear some comms from the crew and the core as we get into this more dynamic period of flight.
What is QR code? This QR code is for the PIX donate,
All right, let's
but
check out another
working
question on X.
only in Brazil. Okay.
All right, since SpaceX CREW-7 is the most international launch, I'm wondering, has NASA ever launched a mission without any American astronauts?
This QR code is
a
only
very
work
interesting
in
question.
Brazil
Yeah, that is an
for
interesting
donate,
question, and I think one thing
because
that is related to
we
this
not
is
have
our new commercial
yet
low Earth orbit program
super
at NASA.
chat.
You know, we've
Yet
seen two
I
missions
can use
with
it for
Axiom and
this
SpaceX launch
QR
together
code
now.
for
Those do launch from Kennedy Space
donate
Center,
in
and
Brazil,
they
yeah,
have
but
a former
work
NASA
only
astronaut as the
in
commander,
Brazil.
but those are fully
It's okay.
considered private, or they have astronauts from other governments. So it's not necessarily a NASA mission. It's not necessarily NASA astronauts on board. But that is happening, and that is kind of paving the way for the future of spaceflight, where we have a low Earth orbit economy.
Right, and here's on
Então,
your
portanto,
screen, our
estamos
international
vendo
crew.
aí na
We
tela
have
aí a
Jasmin
tripulação de
Moghbeli
hoje
as the commander,
da CREW-7,
pilot
né, com a
Andreas
Jasmin
Moghbeli,
Moghbeli,
Satoshi
que é a nossa comandante
Furukawa
aí
as
da
a mission
tripulação de
specialist
hoje,
on
né,
this
dos
flight,
Estados Unidos.
as well
Temos
as
aí o Andreas
Konstantin
da
Borisov.
Dinamarca,
And we are coming
Satoshi
up
Furukawa,
on AI burn
Furukawa
shortly. I think just
do
about a minute
Japão,
away.
e
That
da Rússia,
is a 90-second
Konstantin
burn approximately.
Borisov.
Feels like things are really getting real. We're getting close to the International
Então é a
Space
primeira vez,
Station.
né, que hoje
Right now, we are
temos aí,
about
né,
4.8 miles from
uma
the
tripulação de
station,
cada lugar
not too far.
diferente.
yeah, getting pretty close.
And again, this follows our
Eles
on-time
vão
liftoff
voltar
yesterday
depois de
at
6 meses
12:27 a.m.
a bordo da
Pacific
Estação
time,
Espacial
3:27 a.m.
Internacional.
Eastern
Eles
time.
ficam a cada 6
So it's
meses
about a 30-hour
a
ride
bordo.
to orbit this time. And we've mentioned, you know, they've had the opportunity to be off duty essentially. I'm sure hopefully they got some
No
sleep in
caso
there.
da
Hopefully they
tripulação
had
da
some snacks.
CREW-6,
Yeah.
But
o
it's getting
início
to
do
be go time
retorno
on here. They
deles será
suited
no
up
dia
recently,
1º de
so they should be
setembro.
in their seats, in
O
their
retorno
suits,
deles.
doing leak checks, getting ready for docking.
Estamos
we are just
aguardando
under
então
a
o
minute
retorno do
away from
contato
the
com a
approach initiation burn.
da CREW-7 e também estamos aguardando o retorno de contato de vídeo com a Estação Espacial Internacional, né, que estamos aí no período de momento de blackout de comunicação. 8 horas e 30 minutos no horário de Brasília, por isso que teve esse pequeno adiamento aí
And as we
para
wait for that
as
burn,
10
what
e
you're
11
seeing on
aí
your
a parte
screen
da
is
acoplagem
Mission Control Hawthorne.
da
This is where we have the
da
teams
CREW-7 estão na
monitoring
Estação Espacial
Dragon as
Internacional.
they are approaching the International Space Station.
And of course, this approach initiation burn, we're using the Draco thrusters on Dragon. This is going
Mas nesse
to
momento
bring
eles estão
Dragon
fazendo
up
aquela
about
parte
400
inicial, né,
meters below the station. So we'll be getting pretty
de
close,
queima de
hopefully getting
motor
some
aí
views
para então ganhar
of
velocidade para
Dragon
poder
from
fazer
the
então a
station and
transição
of the station from
de subida
Dragon.
de órbita.
And we just heard that the AI burn has begun. We will probably also hear that call to the crew as well, potentially once it's completed, but it is about a 90-second burn.
Então a primeira queima de órbita a primeira queima de motor nesse momento está sendo realizada. Lembrando que eles precisam fazer então esse ganho aí de velocidade para fazer então a subida de órbita.
So the Draco thrusters on Dragon have just started to fire for the approach initiation burn. Dragon is currently about 2.5 kilometers below station, about 7 kilometers behind it. And again, this burn is going to swing Dragon up until it's about 400 meters, a quarter mile essentially, directly below the station.
Como vocês podem ver, então eles
This
estão nessa
also
parte aí
moves Dragon inside
inicial.
one of 2 checkpoints around the station that require our go no go
né,
polls. We obviously got to go for that.
onde tem aí
The first
a
checkpoint is the approach
a
ellipsoid.
fase
We
de
call it the
queima, né?
AE.
Segunda
That's that
fase de
4
queima.
kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer large 3-dimensional imaginary oval shape. Obviously, we consider this to be on that 24-hour safe
Então, para poder
trajectory.
eles ganharem
Meaning, if
então
we lost control
altitude.
of the thrusters on Dragon, it would not move inside that approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours.
E aí depois a cada 2
And again, we are
quilômetros
waiting for
eles vão
just the
subindo mais.
confirmation that the approach initiation burn has concluded. Dragon does have the ability to perform a mid-course maneuver about halfway through the journey to waypoint 0 to ensure the Dragon...
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, we had a nominal approach initiation burn. If desired, you can review your impulsive retreat cue cards.
SpaceX, Dragon copies on the big loop and reference cue cards have been reviewed.
And Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground, just wanted to confirm that we will not be swapping a LiO cartridge as you previously asked. We'll remain on this cartridge all the way through docking. How copy?
Então nesse momento já voltamos aí com imagens do visual aí da Estação Espacial Internacional e já temos visual aí também da Dragon SpaceX. Nesse momento então foi dada autorização para iniciarmos aí a parte da aproximação. Então aquele pontinho ali no meio da tela, você está vendo aí, é a Dragon SpaceX. Nesse momento então começa aí a parte de aproximação com a Estação Espacial Internacional.
So tally-ho from Dragon. We will start seeing that get bigger and bigger in the frame. You just heard some words coming from the core, the crew operations and resources engineer here in Hawthorne.
And Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground, we'd also like to bring back cameras if you're comfortable with that.
You are go to bring back cameras, SpaceX, thanks.
And the core today is Shiva Bharavaj, and you've probably seen him on some of the
Então
webcasts
lembrando que
before,
a
so he is the
acoplagem,
one
né,
speaking with the crew
o
members today.
docking,
You'll hear that a little bit,
está
getting
previsto
that
para
confirmation
acontecer às
to
10h11
bring
no horário
cameras back
de Brasília.
inside the spacecraft, so hopefully we'll be seeing our astronauts and cosmonaut coming up here soon.
Estamos então aí acompanhando a aproximação então da Dragon. Estamos aí com imagens ao vivo então a bordo da Dragon nesse momento. Então, temos aí então imagens ao vivo então agora da tripulação da Dragon SpaceX.
And you can see on your screen some first views of seeing
da
inside
Jasmin
of Dragon,
e Andreas.
the crew. And again, that is the International Space Station that you can see
Agora
on the screen
voltamos
there.
com a imagem da
One
Estação
thing I love
Espacial
about the International
Internacional.
Space Station is it is about the size of a football field from end zone to end zone, and you can see that with your naked eye. So if you check out spotthestation.nasa.gov, you can put in your location and track when the space station is flying over your area. It'll tell you when to look up and look outside, what direction it'll be coming from. And it's pretty amazing to be able to see our humans from Earth living in space. And back inside the Dragon capsule, we have everyone in their suits and seats. Looks like they are fully suiting up now, putting those gloves on, as well as we have a view of those crew access panels, those displays in front of them, pilot and the commander there in the center.
Now I can explain for you this my carry code.
Of course, Dragon
See
does fly
your
autonomously, but the team
This
can
working
monitor via those
working
panels.
only
They can also
this
send commands
country
if they needed to
of
the
Brazil.
spacecraft.
Only for the Brazilian
Yeah, and we
people.
can see Dragon has a busy
Because this
schedule
for
ahead.
the
But even in space, it
payment
still takes
of the
2 to
PIX,
tango. The International Space Station is
for
also a
donating
factor
here,
in the mix for this
because
dance-like approach
I'm
operation.
not only
So let's check in with
I'm
NASA's
not
Sandra
have
Jones in Houston. How's it going over
super
there,
chat
Sandra?
for this. It's my channel yet. So I can use it for
Good
this
morning and welcome to
QR
the International
code
Space
for the
Station Flight
PIX,
Control Room at the Johnson
but
Space Center in
it's
Houston,
only
Texas.
working
We are
in
gearing
Brazil.
up for this morning's docking and looking forward to
Okay.
having CREW-7 on board Space Station here soon. But before the crew can come aboard, Endurance will complete its docking.
It's not working in another other country.
And on the big loop,
Working only in
SpaceX
Brazil.
copies, and
This
you
carry
are go
code.
to begin 4.011 for suit leak check.
Bem, estamos aí acompanhando agora a parte então da aproximação com a Estação Espacial Internacional, né? Neste momento já estamos iniciando então a
And
fase
those words
final
up to Jasmin Moghbeli,
de
the
aproximação.
Endurance SpaceX Endurance commander. But on board the International Space Station, NASA astronauts Steve Bowen and Woody Hoberg are going to be in the station's cupola using special software to help track Dragon's approach and make sure it stays in the expected
Né, lembrando que a
zones.
missão então
Once
começou
Dragon is docked,
ontem,
Hoberg will
na
be
madrugada
primed
de
to start
ontem, às
hatch opening
4h27
operations, and he'll start by
da
opening
manhã,
a
né, com o
large
lançamento
hatch
então
on
da
node 2
do
Zenith,
Falcon
giving
9,
him access
né,
into
no
the
complexo de
pressurized
lançamento
mating
número
adapter.
39A,
Then the crew will have
na
to
Flórida,
pressurize the
nos
vestibule,
Estados Unidos, né,
which
no
is
Centro
the small
Espacial
space
Kennedy.
between hatches on Dragon and Space Station.
E
Because
aí,
this was
quando chegar
exposed
então
to
à Estação
vacuum prior
Espacial
to docking,
Internacional,
the crew will need to
eles vão
fill it
ficar a
with air
bordo
and make
por
sure
6
its pressure
meses,
is nearly equal
onde eles
with
vão,
the
além de
atmospheric pressure
realizar
on Dragon and the Space
caminhadas
Station.
espaciais, né,
Hoberg will then
que
use a
também a
small
gente
valve on the
transmite
station's
ao
hatch
vivo.
to slowly
Eles
introduce
vão
air into
conduzir
the
aí
station's
por mais de
vestibule.
200
Flight controllers here in Houston will monitor
experimentos,
and verify the
né, que
pressure
estão aí
readings to
na
make sure
Estação
that
Espacial.
everything is leak-free before we get ready to open up the hatches. Here in Mission Control, NASA Flight Director Judd Freeling is leading the team for Dragon's approach and docking today. And to their right is our Capcom today, Amy Dill, who will be communicating with the crew aboard Space Station. Now, as you may know, right now there are 7 astronauts aboard the space station, but of course that number will jump up to 11 once CREW-7 arrives on board. So again, we're excited to get our CREW-7 astronauts aboard to work on handover and orientation with the CREW-6 astronauts before they depart Space
Estamos
Station.
então aí com
But
imagens
for now, that's the latest from
aí
here
em
in
Houston,
Mission
né, no
Control,
centro de
so back over
controle
to Hawthorne.
da Estação Espacial Internacional. Agora
Thanks, Sandra.
voltamos
So
a
while we
imagens
wait for our
da
next
Califórnia,
milestone, let's take a moment to meet
aí
our
no centro
crew.
de controle da
Captain Jasmin Moghbeli
SpaceX.
hails from Baldwin, New York, and earned a bachelor's
Então
degree
temos
in
a
aerospace
tripulação
engineering from the
da
Massachusetts
CREW-7,
Institute
aí
of
sendo apresentada
Technology
novamente para
and a
vocês,
master's
a
degree in
Jasmin
aerospace engineering from the
Moghbeli,
Naval Postgraduate School. She also
que é a
graduated with
nossa então
honors from the
comandante
U.S.
da
Naval Test Pilot School,
CREW-7.
and as an AH-1W Super Cobra pilot and Marine Corps test pilot,
Além
she
de ser
has flown more than
piloto,
150
ela é
missions,
pilota,
accruing
ela é
2,000
também
hours of flight time and more than
engenheira
25 different
aeroespacial.
aircraft. At the time of her selection as an
Foi
astronaut,
e é
Moghbeli was
militar
testing
também.
H-1 helicopters and serving as the quality
Então já
assurance
tem,
and
já tem
avionics
muitas
officer
horas
for
aí,
VMX-1.
várias horas de
She
experiência
is
então de
also
voo
the proud mom of twin
com
girls.
várias aeronaves
They were really
diferentes.
sweet the other night in their SpaceX replica suits when they said farewell. Loved it.
So cute. This is pilot
E aí o nosso
Andreas
piloto,
Mogensen's
Andreas
second trip
Mogensen,
to the space station.
da
His
Astronauta
first
da
was as the
ESA,
flight
da Dinamarca,
engineer- as the flight engineer for the ESA
também
Iris
engenheiro.
mission in 2015. Mogensen has logged
E
9
aí
days,
nosso
20
piloto
hours, and 9 minutes in space. He was born in
também já
Copenhagen,
participou de
Denmark,
outras
and graduated
missões
with an international baccalaureate from the Copenhagen
ficou a bordo também
International
da
School,
Estação
a
Espacial
master's degree in
Internacional também.
aeronautical engineering from Imperial College London, and a doctorate in aerospace engineering from the University of Texas at Austin.
Então, sobre a
In
Starship,
2015, Mogensen
né,
became
a
the
previsão
first
aí que
Danish
nós
person to go to
temos
space.
é que talvez será em outubro, né? Ou outubro ou início de novembro.
And Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, you are go to initiate suit leak check.
And we do not show that the cameras are internal.
And Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground, we are seeing good video.
Yeah, Dragon copies.
And some comms confirming that the crew is go for leak checks.
Então, nesse momento, estamos
He is
iniciando aqueles
serving,
pontos
Andreas Moghbeli is
de
serving as the
ganho
European
de
Astronaut Liaison
altitude,
Officer to NASA's
né, que
Johnson
nós vimos
Space
ali
Center
naquele
in
diagrama.
Houston.
Next up, we have mission
Então, continuando aqui com a apresentação, né, da tripulação, esse é o Satoshi Furukawa, aí então da JAXA, astronauta da JAXA. Ele também é a segunda vez que vai à Estação Espacial Internacional, e ele é médico.
He decided to apply, and he was selected by the National Space Development Agency of Japan to be an astronaut candidate in 1999. His first mission to the International Space Station was as a flight engineer for Expedition 28 and 29 that launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in June 2011.
Mission specialist Konstantin Borisov was selected to be a cosmonaut in 2018.
E aí também nosso segundo especialista da missão, o Konstantin Borisov, aí da Cosmonauta Russo, também o nosso segundo especialista da missão.
University in Coventry, UK, and a master's in aircraft life support systems from the Moscow Aviation Institute. He has worked for companies such as Volvo and the Boston Consulting Group. He is also an experienced freediving instructor, an international freediving judge, and the co-owner of Equilibrium Freediving School.
So that is our very international
E aí estamos de volta então com o centro de controle na Califórnia.
We're looking for docking to happen at about 9:05 Eastern Time today, so 6:05 a.m. Pacific coming up again. That's just a little over an hour and a half from now. This view on the right of your screen is mission control here in Hawthorne. That is where Dragon spacecraft itself is being commanded. We just heard from Sandra Jones in Houston.
Se eu teria coragem de ir para o espaço? Sim, teria. Se eu tivesse a oportunidade, sim. Sim, teria, sim.
And there you can see on your screen the Dragon spacecraft. It is about 27 feet tall.
É um momento único, né, da vida, né?
This Dragon spacecraft that we see now, the second iteration, and the first one, where at the bottom they're pointing out those solar cells. Those are on the base of the trunk of Dragon. The previous iteration of Dragon had solar arrays, and of course, trunk is jettisoned ahead of re-entry, so it'll stay attached the entire time while we're on the International Space Station, but only that top half, that top portion where the crew is inside, of course, that's what brings everyone home and safely splashes down off the coast of Florida. And we expect to see that happen in just about a week with our CREW-7 crew members currently living on the International Space Station. They arrived about 6 months ago.
Dragon, we show 4 good suit leak checks.
Só um minutinho, gente, que eu vou fazer um negocinho aqui rapidinho.
And on the big loop, we see the same.
Deixa eu trocar aqui minha tela aqui rapidinho.
And we just heard confirmation of 4 good suit leak checks, so that's great news. Basically, the crew is prepared for docking to the station. They do have to make sure that their suits are working properly prior to docking to the station.
Então voltamos aqui, né? Então aí temos aí a parte então do uniforme, né? Sendo apresentado para vocês aí, né? O uniforme da Dragon Spacex. Lembrando que este uniforme então só funciona então, dentro da nave Dragon, né? Então quando eles vão para fora da estação espacial, eles usam outro tipo de uniforme. Então, nesse momento, no horário de Brasília, 8 horas e 46 minutos. Estamos, então, aí acompanhando o início, então, de fato, então, da aproximação aí com a Dragon com a Estação Espacial Internacional.
Nitrox air inside of the suit if needed, just as inside of the cabin. So, very much so like one unit working together.
Estamos aguardando novamente contato de vídeo com a estação espacial.
It can be done. It's about halfway from our starting point of approach initiation to waypoint 0. So it's a small burn.
Mas estamos então iniciando a aproximação até o ponto 0, né, da estação, a 400 metros.
And that's what the approach initiation burn did for us, was bring us up to that 400-meter point. Of course, we are still en route to that point, but we also passed
como aí podemos ver aí no diagrama novamente, né, estamos aí fazendo essa agora parte de aproximação até 400 metros da Estação Espacial Internacional. Até esse primeiro ponto 0. E aí depois nós iremos até o primeiro ponto 1, o checkpoint 1.
And you can see on your screen the graphic says
220 metros e depois o checkpoint 2 a 20 metros.
It's a 3D sphere
e assim depois aí nosso contato.
Has a few checkpoints in order to make its way
Lembrando então que o contato então está previsto aí para acontecer
enable to make sure that everything is safe as the vehicle approaches and docks with the International Space Station.
Às
10h11 da manhã, no horário de Brasília.
The space-facing port on the International Space Station. That's really the easiest way to say it because there necessarily isn't an up or down in space. And Dragon Endurance today is joining Dragon Endeavour, which is docked to the forwardmost port of the International Space Station, both on Node 2. So hopefully we get some interesting pictures of both Dragons docked together. Again, we do this so that the crews have time for a handover period. They're able to, pass on what they've learned, pass on anything throughout the flight before Crew 6 heads home themselves.
And this is a very cool graphic. You can kind of see
Então
exactly
estamos
where
aí vendo
Dragon is relative to the space station.
gráfico aí, né, o
Basically,
diagrama
Dragon
aí
is
desse
trying to
momento
align itself with the
da
International
parte
Space
então da
Station
baixa
into
órbita,
the same
né,
orbit.
está
And
então
also a cool
orbitado
thing
aí
that you can
onde
also see in this
orbita
graphic is where the
a Estação Espacial
Hubble Space
Internacional, né, que fica em
Telescope
torno
is
aí de
relative
400
to
quilômetros
both
de
the Dragon
altitude,
spacecraft and the International Space Station, which are both in low
que é
Earth
quase a
orbit.
mesma órbita que o Hubble.
We are taking your questions on X with the hashtag
O Hubble então é um pouquinho
AskNASA.
mais
So
elevado.
if you're wondering something, we will definitely try our best to bring that up and answer it here. So let's see if we have anything. Are there health monitors that continuously check astronauts' vitals during preparation and flight? If so, what happens if it's noticeable that one of them is uncomfortable? So when they're in their suits, they do have the ability to monitor their health and their vitals and things like that here on the ground. But when they're not in their suits, they don't have that availability, and they don't necessarily always need to. The crew can always report how they're feeling as well. We also
Bom dia, meu
have
amigo
something similar in
Renato,
our
seja
suits
bem-vindo
on a
aí à
spacewalk.
transmissão
So
de hoje.
the flight surgeon
Estamos
is
aí
able
acompanhando
to
então
monitor on the
a
ground,
parte da
kind of the
aproximação e
consumables is what we call it.
acoplagem
So
na Estação
the amount of
Espacial
oxygen or the
Internacional.
temperature of the astronaut.
Estamos
So they
aguardando
can
então o
recommend things
retorno
like,
do
maybe
vídeo,
let's pause here, or
contato de vídeo então com a Estação Espacial.
whatever we need to do to either extend the time
Como
that they're
vocês sabem,
available
então
to
temos
use the
pequenos
suit,
períodos
or just to make sure that they're
de
comfortable and
blackout
can
de
get the work done
comunicação,
on the
né, com a
space station.
estação.
Yeah, very cool. We've got another
Estamos
one
aí
here. Is there
justamente
a
então
difference in the amount of
nesse
fuel
período
and
então de
propellant
blackout de
for
comunicação
cargo,
em vídeo
payload, or crew?
com a estação.
Yeah, that's a very interesting
Pelo horário de
question.
Brasília, 8 horas e 50
One thing
minutos.
to point out is
Lembrando
that
que a
the cargo
acoplagem então está
Dragon actually
prevista
does not have
aí para
the
acontecer às
abort thrusters, the
10h11
Draco
da manhã.
thrusters that the crew vehicle have.
E a
So
abertura então da
essentially,
escotilha
you would
às
use less fuel or need
10.
less fuel for a cargo
Deixa eu
mission
dar uma olhada aqui
than
só para
for
confirmar se
the
era às
crew
10.
mission.
Yeah, of course, we call those the super Dracos,
Só pra
and
gente
those are
confirmar
inhibited
aqui.
once we get on orbit. So those are no longer necessary, no longer in use for the flight. Any of the thrusters that are being used are either the service section Dracos or the forward bulkhead Dracos.
Então a abertura da escotilha
Those
está prevista aí
super
para
Draco
acontecer
thrusters around the base of the capsule are really only to
ao
help
meio-dia,
in
né?
a
Meio-dia e
launch abort
2
scenario.
no horário de Brasília. E a
This
cerimônia
question,
então
what is the
de
expected
boas-vindas
time of arrival on the
a
International
meio-dia
Space
e
Station?
meia,
So
tá?
we are
Então a
a couple of
acoplagem
hours away.
às
Well, actually
10h11,
less than that. We
depois a
expect to see
abertura
arrival at
da
6:05
escotilha
a.m.
às
Pacific
meio-dia
time,
e 2 e depois a
9:05
cerimônia de abertura
a.m. Eastern
meio-dia
time. So
e
we're going to see
meia,
things
meio-dia e
getting
meia.
pretty moving along pretty quickly here.
Tá aí
Moving along
confirmando
into
aí
our next milestones. I think coming up next, we will
os
pass through
próximos
waypoint 0.
eventos.
Again, it's not a stopping point. It's just another way we can monitor Dragon's approach to the International Space Station.
And we've got one more question here. What science are we expecting from CREW-7, and what impact is it going to have in future interstellar travel?
I don't know about future interstellar travel necessarily, but of course, I love the opportunity to talk about the science here. There are several investigations going up that CREW-7 will work on. Some of the designers of spacecraft and spacesuits to support the exploration of other planets, they are considering the possibility that humans carry microbes to like bacteria, anything like that, to those locations. So for the ISS external microorganisms mission, the astronauts are going to go on a spacewalk and swab the outside of the space
Estamos
station
então
to
aguardando
determine
o
if
retorno
the
do
space
contato de
station
vídeo com a Estação
releases
Espacial
microorganisms
Internacional.
through the life support system vents, and if anything could live out there in the vacuum of space. So I think that one
Nesse
is
momento, no
really
horário de Brasília, 8
interesting.
horas e
Yeah, that
52
would be
minutos.
very interesting to
Estamos
know.
então acompanhando a parte de
The International
aproximação
Space
aí
Station
com a Estação
is in low
Espacial
Earth
Internacional
orbit,
até
so
o
that's
ponto
pretty
zero.
close to Earth. So it'd be very, very interesting if
400
they did find or discover something new.
Yeah, of course, it's something I think that we talk a lot about too as we look at interplanetary travel too, and wanting to keep those locations as clean as possible. That's why you have spacecraft in clean rooms. That's why you have people suited up, you know, wearing caps so that their hairs don't even fall onto
Lembrando
vehicle,
que a
because we want to make sure
previsão
when we
prevista aí para a
arrive at
acoplagem da
future
estação,
destination,
né,
whether it's
às
the moon, whether it's
10h11
Mars,
da
that
manhã,
we are seeing something as it was
horário
and
de
not
Brasília.
as influenced by humans. That way, if we discover anything microbial there, we know it's natural there. It's not coming from Earth with us.
Now on your screen, on the left-hand side is Mission Control Hawthorne. This is the team that's
Estamos
actually
aí com
monitoring
imagens também
Dragon,
do centro de controle
and they monitor Dragon
em Houston,
from
aí da
liftoff all the
Estação
way
Espacial
to the
Internacional.
crew arriving at the International Space Station, as well as when the crew returns back home all the way through splashdown.
Lembrando que
That
a
mission
partir então,
control room
lembrando que
in
no dia 1º de
Hawthorne,
setembro nós
that's
vamos
the team
nós
that
vamos
is
acompanhar
monitoring Dragon and the crew
aí o
throughout
início
the
do
entire mission.
retorno da tripulação da CREW-7.
Yeah, and obviously we are getting into joint operations now. That means both of these teams are working together. So previously, you know, the International Space Station was obviously clearly monitoring Dragon's flight, but mainly focused on the International Space Station and preparing it for docking. But now these teams are really working in tandem as we get closer to those two vehicles linking up. Again, coming up in just a little over an hour from now.
E ainda
6:05
hoje,
a.m.
né, a partir
Pacific,
das
9:05 a.m.
20h50
Eastern
da
time.
noite,
Yeah, this really
aqui no horário
shows
de
that
Brasília,
teamwork
nós vamos
makes the
acompanhar
dream work.
a missão direto lá do Japão,
I think you're
Missão
100%
Slim,
right.
onde então o Japão vai levar então seu módulo lunar até a Lua.
So we were talking a little bit about the science on that CREW-7 will be working on. Of course, the International Space Station has been in orbit been constantly inhabited for almost 23 years now. So there have been thousands, I would think, I know hundreds, definitely over 1,000 scientific experiments going on the International Space Station. Another one of these looks at the microgravity and artificial day and night cycles on the International Space Station. So obviously, here on Earth, we have our circadian rhythm that helps us regulate when it's day, when it's nighttime. Sometimes we wake up in the middle of the night to cover a crew mission to the International Space Station. But the microgravity and those artificial day and night cycles, they can affect the astronauts. They change the daily rhythm, change their sleep pattern. That can affect their health, their well-being, any cognitive performance. So there is an investigation from the European Space Agency, ESA. It's called Sleep in Orbit, and that'll look at the physiological differences between sleep on Earth and in space. They're going to use an EEG device. It'll measure the brain activity of the astronauts during sleep, help analyze that down on the ground. So really interesting.
Yeah, that does sound very interesting, especially when the International Space Station sees about 16 orbits a day. I can't imagine, what that does to the human
Quem
body
está
or the
chegando aí,
human
estamos
mind.
aí aguardando
When typically,
as
you
imagens da Estação
associate
Espacial Internacional
daytime with
voltarem.
sunlight and
Estamos aí
nighttime
no período
with darkness.
de
And you're
blackout de
kind of getting that
comunicação em vídeo com a
fluctuation throughout the
estação.
entire day. So I wonder how that kind of changes
Estamos então com a fase de
somebody's
aproximação. Voltamos então com as
when
imagens
they're
da
there
Estação
for,
Espacial
6 months or more.
Internacional neste momento.
And tally
Estamos
ho
vendo aí
on
mais de
Dragon
perto
from the
agora
International Space Station.
a
You can
Dragon.
see that little blinking light. That is our CREW-7, crew of 4.
Então lembrando
Getting
que
closer and
aqueles
closer
três
to the
pontos
International
ali,
Space
né, que a gente
Station.
está
Of
vendo
course,
ali agora,
we did have
é
our
a
approach
Dragon,
initiation burn.
SpaceX, Endeavour.
We are standing by. We may see a mid-course maneuver. This is
8
an
horas e
optional burn just to help
57 minutos.
fine-tune that approach to the International
Então
Space
agora
Station.
estamos iniciando
We
o
will pass
procedimento de
through
aproximação
waypoint
aí
0
até o
and then
ponto
waypoint 1, we'll
até
do
o primeiro
brief
até o ponto
pause.
zero de
Pulling up my
checkpoint
data right now.
a
Let's
400 metros.
We are just about a mile from the International Space Station. So if you've ever run a mile before, you can run between Dragon and the space station. That's how close they are. Of course, it is a very
E aí temos
slow and steady
imagens
approach at this point
mais
when
de
you have
perto,
two
então no
spacecraft,
visual
getting ready
da Dragon.
to connect. It's very fine-tuned. And I just did get confirmation the mid-course maneuver is underway. This will be a short burn. Again, just fine-tuning, making sure we put Dragon exactly where we want it before it docks to the zenith or the space-facing port on the International Space Station.
And kind of going back to what you see on your screen, much like a ship has starboard and port to that green and red light to see the orientation. Dragon and these spacecraft also have that same green and red light so that you can tell what the orientation of the vehicle is in.
So we have, again, conducted the approach initiation burn. We are in the mid-course maneuver right now. Again, very short burn, just to confirm and make sure we're exactly where we want to be on Dragon. Soon we should be able to
Vamos aí
see
novamente
some views
com as
of the
imagens da
International Space
Dragon.
Station from Dragon as well. Now we are docking to the zenith port today.
Lembrando que
the
agora,
space-facing port.
agora nessa etapa, né, ele vai até
may not have views at the time
o
of
ponto
docking.
zero
That
de
is
checkpoint a
because when we
400
send
metros da
signals from the
Estação
cameras, we don't
Espacial
want it to bounce back
Internacional.
off of Dragon. That can damage the cameras themselves. So we may not have views during that point as it prepares to dock, at least not from the closest camera, but we will have confirmation.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, we had a nominal mid-course correction and the trajectory has converged on waypoint 0. Expect waypoint 0 arrival at 1217 Zulu.
Então aí confirmando, então agora eles podem seguir então até o ponto zero aí a 400 metros.
Great news. We had confirmation that the mid-course maneuver is complete and that we are on track to waypoint 0 at the 5:17 a.m. Pacific time timestamp there, which is just about 18 minutes from now.
And of course, they could hold at waypoint 0 if they wanted to, but we don't have anything that's tracking for us to do that at this time. They'll be
Então
able
daqui a
to
18
right
minutos,
through
né?
waypoint
Então
1. I believe
chegaremos
that's about
aproximadamente aí
220
até
meters
18
from the
minutos
station.
no primeiro
These
ponto, né? O
pauses are
ponto
built
0, então de
in so
aproximação
that we
aí
can
a
continue to
400
check the
metros.
systems on Dragon as well as on the International Space Station side. Just make sure everyone is still performing optimally before we get into this delicate dance.
Nesse momento, então, no horário de Brasília, 9
And like we were just
horas.
talking about, you know, we see liftoff happen so fast. The crew is traveling very quickly, you know, catching up to the International Space Station. Some of these burns last
Então,
quite
nesse
a long
momento, a
time,
Dragon
but as we get closer
SpaceX
and
inicia nesse
closer,
momento
you know, it is much,
a aproximação
much
até o
slower, much
ponto
more
0
paced
a
as
400
we
metros.
get into the approach ellipsoid, the keep out sphere, just bringing these two spacecraft closer together and making sure that we are very careful as we bring them together in space.
Então, lembrando que quem estiver então, acompanhando a gente aqui agora ao vivo, né? Estamos aí com a transmissão da chegada então da tripulação da CREW-7 na Estação Espacial Internacional. Lembrando então que a acoplagem está prevista para acontecer às 10h11 da manhã, no horário de Brasília. E ainda hoje, a partir das 8h50 da noite, vamos acompanhar então a missão Slim, direto então, do Japão com o veículo H2.
Those missions, the scientists are looking
Então,
at
a
how
base de
this extended
Tanegashima.
time in space affects the human body, because of course we know missions to Mars are going to be longer than these 6-month mission durations to the International Space Station. So astronauts on these missions of various length can participate in an integrated set of studies that monitor their health before, during, and after the missions. These are 14 experiments. They are collectively called the Complement of Integrated Protocols for Human Exploration Research. To shorten that, we just call it CIPHER. These collect multiple physiological and psychological measures of the human response to time and space. So these results could play a pivotal role in ensuring the safety, the health, the success of astronauts on deep space
Depois disso, a
exploration
cerimônia
missions,
de
which of course
boas-vindas
is our
na
next big
Estação
goal.
Espacial Internacional
Right, like
está
we've
prevista
sent
para acontecer
humans, you know,
a
hundreds of
meio-dia e
thousands of
11,
miles away, but on
às
interplanetary
12h30,
missions, they're going to
desculpe,
be
às 12h30,
they're going to be going
no horário de
potentially
Brasília,
millions of miles away,
cerimônia
right?
de
And we would like to
boas-vindas.
know, you know, maybe how these long duration missions affect the body, so that we can understand how the body will react, you know, in a longer period of time, maybe longer than 6 months. It could be months, it could be years.
And you know, we do have NASA astronaut Frank Rubio on board, who will, when he comes home, hold the record for the longest amount of time in space. I believe it's 371 days. So over a year in space for an American astronaut. That'll be the new record. He is still on
Bom dia,
board. We
Renata. Não
expect to see
falei,
him come
falei
home
com você,
next
só
month.
falei
So I
com
know he
você,
must be
né? Bom
looking
dia,
forward to
seja
his
bem-vindo.
return to Earth.
Sejam todos bem-vindos, então,
Now,
aí,
our next milestone
a nossa
is
transmissão de hoje.
well, we expect waypoint 0 arrival. Again, that'll be at about 5:17 a.m. Pacific time, so about 15 minutes from now. And again, if you're just tuning in, this is Dragon making its way to the International Space Station, this view coming from the space station itself.
Estamos então aguardando a confirmação da chegada dentro de alguns instantes. No ponto 0 então de aproximação, com a estação a 400 metros.
#AskNASA. See if we have some questions here. How long was the prep for this mission overall? Ooh, that's a great question.
Yeah, so, you know, a lot of these crew members have been assigned to this mission for probably over a year-ish, but they've been astronauts for longer, or a cosmonaut for longer. You know, we know Satoshi Furukawa was selected as an astronaut in 1999. So upon selection, you really start your prep for your missions, even though you don't necessarily know what mission you'll be on at that time. But you start things immediately, like training how to use the systems on the International Space Station, how to perform maintenance, how to do spacewalks. So your training really starts the day you become an astronaut candidate. However, training for this mission gets a little more intense when they are assigned. and when they can come here to Hawthorne and start training with the teams here, as well as training specific experiments they might conduct on the International Space Station.
Right, it's not just training
Nós
for the
estávamos aí com
liftoff and launch
imagens
to the International Space
da
Station, but
Dragon, né?
it's
O pessoal
all the
a bordo
training
aí
that
da Dragon.
includes, flying,
Temos imagens
potentially
rápidas aí.
flying Dragon if needed, performing the science experiments on the International Space Station. Sometimes the astronauts actually have to go and help,
E aí
build or
temos
rebuild or
imagens do lado de
maintenance
fora da
parts of the
Dragon,
International Space Station, so they'll need
aí
training
com a
on that
visão
as
então da
well. So
Estação
it's a pretty
Espacial
dynamic
Internacional.
training program for these
Então
astronauts.
perdemos imagens novamente, perdemos contato. Estamos novamente então com contato interno
Got a
aí da
live look
Dragon
inside
SpaceX.
Dragon Endurance right now. That's pilot and Commander Jasmin Moghbeli and pilot Andreas Mogensen, just monitoring the spacecraft's progress.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Ground has pulled go for approach 0 and 1 and will enable the maneuver shortly.
Então aí temos imagens do lado de fora aí da Dragon, da câmera acoplada então a parte de fora.
And those words confirming that we are good to continue the approach to the International Space Station, and we'll pass through waypoint 0. Again, we expect that waypoint 0 mark to come at about 5:17 a.m. Pacific, so about 12 minutes from now. Again, they will not pause there. They will go to pass through to waypoint 1. That's about 220 meters away from the International Space Station. This view again from inside Dragon, crew monitoring as Dragon flies
9h06 pelo horário de Brasília. Estamos então aguardando a chegada então da tripulação da CREW-7 aí no ponto 0 aí a 400 metros.
686 meters from the station, or about 0.4 miles. So getting closer and closer, again looking for docking at 9:05 a.m. Eastern. 6:05 a.m. Pacific, so
novamente
almost
imagens
exactly an hour from now.
da Dragon, da Estação Espacial.
And we did see views of the International Space Station before, which looked like
Temos
tiny
então
little dot,
imagens
and now
divididas
we're
aí
getting
da
so close that you can
à
really
esquerda, então
see,
imagens
the
da
International Space
Dragon,
Station
né,
there, and that's on
dentro da
your
estação,
left-hand screen.
e da estação
And looking
vendo
from the
a
International
Dragon na
Space Station
direita.
to Dragon on your right-hand screen, getting a really cool view of Dragon.
And you see that glow. That is the spacecraft are both going into an orbital daytime. So we've talked about how the at orbital velocity, you're orbiting the Earth 17,500 miles per hour. You see a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes. So they're going into that sunrise period. That's why you saw that glow, that blooming on the camera. They will be there again for about 45 minutes. It does look like we may dock just as we get into an orbital nighttime. But again, this view on your right-hand side of the screen, the Dragon capsule itself, and then its destination on the left, the International Space Station, both have eyes on each other. And we are in the big loop, as we talked about earlier, meaning they can all communicate on the same communication network.
And we did get a go for approaching waypoint 0 as well as waypoint 1. We're just about 10 minutes away from the expected time of arrival at waypoint 0. And again, this is just a checkpoint. They do not need to stop. They can continue to pass through waypoint 0 and move to waypoint 1, which will swing it up and out in front of the space station. And it'll pause at a distance of approximately 220 meters away from the station.
Now, right now, as we speak, the International Space Station has just started flying over the state of Washington. It's about to fly directly over Seattle. So if you're in the area, it is about to cross over into Canada as well. So if you're in that area near that border, go outside, maybe look up. You can always check out spottthestation.nasa.gov
cada vez mais
to see
perto
when
aí
it'll
temos
fly
a
over you.
Estação
But it is
Espacial
going to pass over the
Internacional aí cada vez
continental
mais
U.S.
perto de nós.
Right now, it's flying right over the
Estamos
state of
então
Washington.
nos
So I'm sure
aproximando
if
do
they
ponto
looked
zero
down
de
right now, would have
aproximação a
beautiful views
400 metros.
of the mountain ranges there. It'll be south of Calgary here pretty shortly.
And as you mentioned earlier, you don't need a telescope to see the International Space Station. You can actually see it with the naked eye. It's about the size of a football field and big enough for you to walk outside and be able to see it pass by.
And I know they can't see me, but I always wave.
Hey, you never know.
So again, things still progressing pretty smoothly this morning. Next milestone being that they will pass through, will not stop at waypoint 0, less than 8 minutes from now. And a reminder, we are going to the zenith, or the space-facing port of the International Space Station today. They will be next-door neighbors with Dragon Endeavour, which is at the forward-facing port on Node 2. And right now on the International Space Station, we have 7 crew members. So we are going to have 11 people living and working on the orbiting laboratory for the next several days. We'll start looking at an undocking timeline and a splashdown date for CREW-7 pretty soon. But we want to make sure they get that handover time. So right now, again, 7 people living on the space station. Right now, it looks like 4 of them are having their midday meal. So on the space station, they use Greenwich Mean Time. It's just a little bit after noon there, about 12:10 p.m. A few of them are eating. Again, this is a weekend day, so technically, sometimes if there's not operations going on, they do get time off on the weekends. They're able to relax, talk to family members. Right now, several of them are eating, and then Woody Hoberg will step into the Dragon approach monitoring. He will also work on pressurizing the vestibule once we are docked.
And on your screen is a pretty cool view from the International Space Station looking
E aí
at
temos
Dragon.
imagens
You
então
can
mais
see
de perto
the
aí
nose cone
agora da
deployed,
Dragon, vistas então
and you
da
can also
Estação
see some
Espacial
of the thrusters.
Internacional.
They're using the Draco
Estamos aí nos
thrusters to
aproximando então do
maneuver
ponto 0,
Dragon
né, do
towards the International
checkpoint
Space Station.
0, aí a
You can see
400
Earth
metros.
in the background.
Yeah, right now they are flying over Saskatchewan, so south
No
of
horário de Brasília, então, 9 horas e
Saskatoon.
12 minutos.
That's the view below
Imagens
Dragon
lindas
there,
aí que nós estamos vendo.
and then Dragon's view of the
Aí
International
da
Space Station.
visão
So
da
if you're in that
Dragon
area,
e da visão da
go
Estação
take a
Espacial.
look up. You might spot our crew members.
Imagens lindíssimas aí.
Again, less than an hour away from docking now. It will bring that crew up
Estamos
to
então a mais ou
7
menos
people.
aproximadamente a 1 hora da
And we
da
are about 5
acoplagem.
minutes from reaching waypoint 0. Expected
Estamos
time is 5:17 a.m.
a
Pacific
5
time.
minutos do primeiro do checkpoint 0. Aí a 400 metros.
So during that crew handover period, when we talked about, these 11 crew members on the International Space Station, we have CREW-7. That consists of Stephen Bowen, Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al-Nayati, and Andrei Fedyayev. They have been living up there for about 6 months now. And before we bring them home, we want them to be able to talk to CREW-7. We have some first-time flyers, especially on this spacecraft. So we want them to be able to show them the ropes of what's going on aboard the International Space Station. They can hand over any science experiments that they've been working on, show them any of the safety protocols. That's actually one of the very first things that they will do right after they dock. They will move into an ISS safety briefing. They get a lot of training on the ground about how to handle any contingencies or off-nominal situations, but once you get in space, it's just different. You need to do it again. You need the refresher. So it's, safety is the utmost importance. So that's the first thing that they'll do after they dock and do their welcoming ceremony for us. But that crew handover period, it gives a nice buffer for these team members to be able to share what's been happening on the International Space Station over the last 6 months with this crew who has just arrived. This view from another camera on the International Space Station. Again, this station right now is about 262 statute miles over Earth, actually flying over Ontario at this point. It's moving pretty fast. Just a couple minutes ago, it was flying over Washington State. We're now all the way over Ontario.
Aguardando então a confirmação da
17,500
chegada
miles
então
an
do
hour.
primeiro
That is about 5 miles
checkpoint
per
0,
second.
400 metros
Quite speedy.
da estação.
And speed is relative, so it doesn't look that fast on your screen, but that is very, very fast.
We are just a few minutes now from passing through waypoint 0. And we expect to pass through waypoint 1 as well. That'll be about 20-25 minutes following our pass through waypoint 0. Again, these are points built into the docking process. That way, if we needed to hold at these, we definitely can. It's a great opportunity to check out any systems, but the teams here in Hawthorne as well as in Houston have pulled go. They're not tracking any issues that would preclude us from a safe docking. Again, looking at that coming up at about 6:05 a.m. Pacific. And our Cronus flight controller in Houston is the one who is navigating these cameras on the International Space Station. So they always do a great job of getting us some
Estamos
really
então
amazing
aguardando aí
views,
a confirmação da
as
chegada do
Dragon
ponto
gets
0, aí no
closer.
checkpoint 0, a 400 metros. Dentro de 3
Again, just as
minutos.
a reminder, waypoint 0 will mean that Dragon is 400 meters directly below station, and as it
Dentro de
maneuvers to
aproximadamente então aí
waypoint
2
1,
a
that
3
is basically
minutos.
swinging the vehicle to out in front of the station, and it will be approximately 220 meters away from
Lembrando
station.
então mais uma vez que a partir das 20 horas e 50
And that is
minutos,
coming up here in
no horário de
just about
Brasília,
2 minutes from
ainda
now.
hoje vamos acompanhar então a missão direto lá do Japão.
We're reaching waypoint 0 is coming up in about 2 minutes.
And waypoint 1 puts us on the
Lembrando
docking
que o
axis,
veículo
so it
H2
pretty
então
much lines
nesse
us
momento já se
directly up
encontra
with that corridor
na plataforma de
that
lançamento lá
the
na
spacecraft
base
will follow all the way in
japonesa em
to where it
Tanagashima.
docks on the zenith port of the International Space Station. There is a pause at waypoint 2.
Então vai levar além
That's about
do
20 meters away, so that is kind of the
do módulo
final
lunar
checks
Slim.
of all the systems on
Ele
both
também
sides of the
está
spacecrafts
com
to make sure
o
that everyone's still go for
o
docking, we're not tracking any major issues.
XRISM, né,
They
que é
can
o
hold there for any lighting changes that they
telescópio então
wanted
da
to. But not always necessary. So
telescópio
sometimes
então
it's
de
a brief pause, and
raio-x.
sometimes they just hold to make sure that everything is checking out as planned.
And you did just see a view inside of the cabin of Dragon, and you saw our astronauts, our commander and pilot, there basically just monitoring. Dragon is an autonomous vehicle, so really all the crew needs to do is just monitor as they approach the station. There's really no manual driving or flying at this point.
This gives you a great view with the nose cone open. That's where the docking mechanism is located. That's the hatch through which these astronauts will fly through Dragon and into the International Space Station. Of course, yesterday during launch, we saw them enter through the side hatch. They won't use that again until they splash down and are back on Earth and egress on the recovery ship. So, we just got confirmation. We have arrived at waypoint 0. We are converging our trajectory on waypoint 1.
Novamente imagens do lado de fora da Dragon, dentro da Estação Espacial Internacional.
The International Space Station, as we're going to be going to the zenith port, so we're going to be going directly above it. We'll be
Estamos
looking down
aguardando
on the
então a
space station.
confirmação da chegada então no primeiro no ponto 0
looking down on
checkpoint a
Dragon,
400
it'll be
metros.
flip-flopped. So Dragon will be looking down on the space station and see Earth below that. So again, we've just reached waypoint 0, which means Dragon is 400 meters directly below station. And we can see it in views now coming from the International Space Station. But coming up, Dragon will move from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1. That'll swing it up and out in front of the space station, actually directly above it, pausing at a distance of approximately 220 meters. Again, that puts us on the docking axis. That essentially means it's directly in front of the docking port. And again, we've heard teams do the go no go polls, everything.
Então agora a próxima etapa é o primeiro ponto de checkpoint a partir então 200 a 220 metros.
So again, coming up next we will see
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Approach 0 has started and the trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expect arrival at waypoint 1 around 1259 UTC.
Então, nesse momento foi dada aí a autorização para seguir para o primeiro ponto de checkpoint a 220 metros da estação.
And just the core communicating with the crew, confirming that they are on their way to waypoint 1.
Então agora nesse momento a cápsula Dragon Endeavour segue aí para o primeiro ponto de checkpoint a 220 metros.
Just about 30 minutes from now, so we do have some time as this maneuver happens. This is a slow and steady process. Again, we are traveling at 17,500 miles per hour, but the process
Lembrando então que depois dessa
slow and steady,
transmissão nós vamos
as we pass through
ter
each one of these
sempre nosso
checkpoints to
vídeo,
make
né, dos
sure
melhores
that we can
momentos
monitor everything that's
aí
happening,
desta transmissão.
and make sure that the vehicle is safe, the crew is safe, as well as the International Space Station is also safe before we begin docking with the space station.
We were just talking about
No horário de Brasília, agora 9 horas e 20 minutos. Estamos aí acompanhando então a parte da aproximação com a Estação Espacial Internacional pela Dragon Endeavour com a tripulação CREW-7. Lembrando que agora estamos nos seguindo aí para o primeiro ponto de checkpoint a 220 metros da estação.
If you're looking towards the top of the International Space Station or towards the top of your screen, you can see Dragon Endeavour docked to that forward-facing port. Again, we are going to the zenith port, so you can see that outline perfectly. That's so fascinating. You can also see some of those International Space Station rollout solar arrays, those IROSAs. If you look towards the right side, you know, they look like they are a little bit detached, sort of. They are mounted differently on our solar arrays. Again, we have passed through waypoint 0, heading up to waypoint 1. International Space Station looking especially beautiful this morning. And we are in that orbital daytime. We are now flying over the Atlantic Ocean, so we have at this point passed over the continental US, North America.
And on your left-hand screen is a view inside of Dragon. On your left-hand side is Commander Jasmin Moghbeli, and on your right-hand side is the pilot for this mission, Andreas Mogensen. Again, they are just monitoring. They are able to confirm, you know, on their displays that what they see matches what we see here in mission control as they make their way to docking to the International Space Station. And these views are really awesome. Seeing Earth in the background, looking almost so crisp there.
I know. And CREW-7, once they arrive at the International Space Station, they will have these beautiful views for about 6 months, living and working, doing science and research on the International Space Station. We did get an updated docking time. It has shifted just a few minutes to the right. We're now tracking 9:08 a.m. Eastern Time. Literally just a 3-minute change, so just fine-tuning after we've done the approach initiation burn and that mid-course maneuver. Again, we've passed through waypoint 0, moving up toward waypoint 1. Things continue to look good so far for Dragon Endurance on its journey to the International Space Station.
Nesse momento, então, pelo horário de Brasília, 9 horas e 24 minutos. Estamos seguindo aí, acompanhando a parte, então, da aproximação da Dragon Endurance, a Estação Espacial Internacional.
A spacecraft have the opportunity to name it. And so the first flight of Endurance was the CREW-3 mission. It was named Endurance by the astronauts themselves. Obviously, they said it's a tribute to the tenacity of the human spirit as we push farther than ever with commercial opportunities in low Earth orbit and plans to go to the moon and Mars. So common theme.
Awesome. We're seeing another view from the International Space Station. Looking.
Yeah, if you look closely, there's Dragon in the center there. Again, our Cronus flight controller tracking these views for us in Mission Control Houston.
Thank you, Cronus.
Lembrando também que aqui no nosso canal a gente transmite também as caminhadas espaciais, tanto pelo lado russo quanto pelo lado americano.
And as a reminder, as Dragon approached waypoint 0, was directly under the International Space Station. As it moves to waypoint 1, it's actually going to swing up and align itself with the
9 horas e
space
25 minutos.
So you
Estamos
no
aguardando
longer
então
will
a
be
confirmação
looking
da chegada
down
então
from
a
the space
220
station and
metros.
have that view of Earth in the background, because it will be aligned with the docking port, which is the zenith port today. It's the space-facing side of the International Space Station.
Once our astronauts arrive and our cosmonaut arrive to the International Space Station today, they will be members of Expedition 69. That will remain their designation, so they won't keep these roles, these titles that they have right now. You know, we have
Lembrando
Jasmin
mais uma
Moghbeli as
vez,
our
né, que
commander.
após a
Once she
acoplagem
gets to
da
the International Space Station, she
tripulação
will
da
be a flight
estação,
engineer.
a abertura da
And they
escotilha
will
então
remain
será feita
Expedition
a
69
partir então do meio-dia
until
e 2 no
departure
horário de
of
Brasília,
Soyuz next month.
e a
That will be
cerimônia
bringing Frank Rubio
de
home. That is when we
boas-vindas,
will enter Expedition
meio-dia e
70. So their
30.
titles will change over at that point to Expedition 70 crew members. We are about 25 minutes until we expect to reach waypoint 1. Sorry, about 35 minutes, I believe. Again, that's that 220 meter. It can be used as a hold point. I don't think we intend to use it as a hold point today, but it is on the docking axis. It'll be directly above the International Space Station, directly above that zenith port on node 2. All right, and a reminder, we are taking your questions on X with the hashtag AskNASA. We have one from Sahid asking if there are any problems with docking if they are on the dark side of the Earth, which it does happen several times a day. We see that happen about every 45, 90 minutes, or sorry, a sunrise, sunset every 45 minutes. And do they face visibility issues? So Dragon is fully autonomous. It uses LiDAR to track the International Space Station and to line up with that docking port. The crew members do have the opportunity to take control if needed, but they don't necessarily need to wait for that lighting. The Dragon knows where the station's docking port is, and we have lights out on the exterior of the International Space Station anyway. So sometimes we do hold for lighting just to double confirm, just to make sure, but there is usually no problem docking in darkness.
Yeah, I believe it's actually more of a problem when it's too bright. So when it's too bright, they do take a pause and wait for it to get a little bit darker, just to make sure that, again, because this is an autonomous vehicle, make sure that the Dragon spacecraft can actually see the International Space Station.
Pelo horário de Brasília, 9 horas e 30 minutos.
And we are taking
Estamos aí continuando
questions on
acompanhando
X with the hashtag
a parte então de
@NASA.
aproximação e
This one is
acoplagem
where can
da
I
Dragon
see the
SpaceX
post-launch news conference from yesterday.
aí na Estação
And also,
Espacial
you're doing a
Internacional.
Good job. Good job,
Thank you
Leah.
so much. Good job, Jesse. Thank you so much. You can find the post-launch news conference on NASA's YouTube. They did a great job breaking down the ascent and what it looks like for this rendezvous profile. So if you want to go back, take a look at NASA's YouTube, you can search for the CREW-7 post-launch news conference and it should come right up. Next question is, when will CREW-7 be
Estamos
back to
então aí
Earth?
nos aproximando do primeiro ponto
These are
de
long
checkpoint
duration rotational missions,
a
but
220
the
metros
durations are
da estação.
approximately 6 months. So every 6 months, we fly a crew up to the International Space Station, and the crew on board will then return back home. So CREW-7 will be up there for about 6 months and come back.
We're starting to see the views change a little bit. You know, we were looking directly down on Dragon, but now we are swinging up and above the International Space Station, because we'll be docking to that zenith port. So again, like I mentioned earlier, we were looking directly down on Dragon with the Earth below it. Pretty soon, Dragon will be looking directly down on the International Space Station with the Earth below it. Looks like right now they are flying off the west coast of Senegal, about 260 statute miles above Earth.
And if you're just now joining us, you are tuned in to the CREW-7 mission. The crew launched last night at 12:27 a.m. Eastern Time. 12:27 a.m. Pacific Time, 3:27 a.m. Eastern Time. And now the crew is making their way to the International Space Station. We've already had a few burns. We've passed through checkpoint waypoint 0, and now the vehicle is swinging up towards waypoint 1. We are just under 25 minutes away from the expected time of arrival to waypoint 1, which will put the vehicle in line with the docking adapter on the International Space Station, and also put the vehicle directly above the International Space Station.
So if you're tracking, that's an almost 30-hour ride to orbit. The crew are suited up now. They are in their seats. They have not had to do so during the flight, and we just got a really cool view of one of those Draco thrusters firing, helping us fine-tune our approach to the space station. Our 4 crew members arriving today: Jasmin Moghbeli, Andreas Mogensen, Satoshi Furukawa, and Konstantin Borisov. Dragon looks pretty small in this picture, but we are getting closer and closer to the International Space Station. Waypoint 1 is our next really milestone. That'll be 220 meters directly above the station. We'll pass through that, head to waypoint 2, which is a hold point. It can be a brief pause. That's 20 meters away from the docking port. And once the astronauts arrive, they will be joining a crew of already 7 people living on the International Space Station. So bringing that total up to 11.
9 horas e 34 minutos no horário de Brasília. Estamos aí continuando acompanhando aí a parte então da aproximação e acoplagem da Dragon Endeavour SpaceX, prevista então para acontecer às 10h11 da manhã no horário de Brasília. Estamos aguardando então a confirmação a chegada então no primeiro ponto de checkpoint a 220 metros. Lembrando que ainda hoje, a partir das 20h50 da noite, nós vamos acompanhar a missão direto lá do Japão com o veículo H2. Está na base de Tanegashima.
And we just had a view from the International Space Station looking at Dragon from a bit further away. And now we've got a very good close-up as Dragon gets closer and closer to the International Space Station.
Yeah, looking crystal clear. Again, that nose cone is open. Of course, when we launch, it is closed. And when we re-enter Earth's atmosphere, it's closed to protect that docking mechanism that's beneath it. So that's exactly the point that'll line up with that zenith port on the International Space Station. It'll dock. The teams on the space station will take some time to make sure they pressurize the vestibule. That's the space between the Dragon hatch and the space station hatch. So when Dragon docks, that space is going to be out of vacuum. It's been previously exposed to outer space. And we want to make sure that it's equalized before we open up those hatches and the crew floats in. So that is a process that takes about an hour-ish, you know, making sure that we've got all those levels equaled out before we welcome the crew aboard the space station. Yeah, this is another view from the International Space Station. You can see one of the robotic arms on the left, and close to center of your screen, that is Dragon.
Lembrando que após a acoplagem, né, a abertura da escotilha, então, interna da Estação Espacial Internacional, acontecerá aí por volta de 12:02 no horário de Brasília, e a cerimônia, então, de boas-vindas ao 12:30. Estamos aguardando então ainda a confirmação da chegada então no checkpoint, primeiro checkpoint, a 220 metros.
Again, we are about 23, 22 minutes away from waypoint 1, reaching waypoint 1. Can be used as a hold point. We do not anticipate doing so today. We're heading to the zenith port of the space station on node 2, and it'll continue flying in. It'll be on that docking corridor until it's about 20 meters away. And we are looking for docking today at 9:08 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:08 a.m. Pacific Time. And this again is Dragon Endurance that we're looking at. It flew first on the CREW-3 mission. It also flew the CREW-5 astronauts to the International Space Station.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Expect reconfiguration of the C2V2 return link shortly.
Dragon copies on the big loop.
And a reminder, we are taking your questions on X with the hashtag AskNASA. So if there's something you're curious about, let us know. This question from Jack: what have the astronauts been doing in between launch and docking?
Well, they've been floating around a bit. But they have had some rest periods, some meal periods. You know, they're able to eat while they're in microgravity as they're making their way to the International Space Station. After ascent, once they made it to orbit, they were able to get out of their spacesuits and actually enjoy microgravity. And they've also
Pelo horário de Brasília agora,
follow
9h40
some
minutos.
procedures
Estamos então aí
As we're
acompanhando
getting closer and closer to the
a
International
parte então de
Space
aproximação
Station,
da
they did have to
Dragon
prepare
Endeavour
for
na
some of
Estação
the burns
Espacial
that
Internacional.
enable the Dragon vehicle to get
Estamos aí
or to
aguardando
approach
a
the
confirmação
International
então da
Space
chegada
Station.
no
So,
ponto de
plethora of
220
activities over
metros
the past
da
30
estação, que é o
hours.
primeiro
Yeah, they also get the
checkpoint.
opportunity to eat if they want to. They have
Ponto
some
ponto,
shelf-stable meals
checkpoint.
that they can choose from, and you'll probably hear
Lembrando
after
que vamos ter
docking, they will
mais um
report
próximo
out
ponto, né, a
what
20
was
metros da
consumed.
estação,
Not necessarily the food itself, but they'll
antes da
say this
acoplagem.
many packets from this bag.
Está previsto
Everything
então
is
para
so
acontecer às 10
meticulously
e 11 da
tracked
manhã,
in space
no
on the
horário de
International
Brasília.
Space Station. It can be difficult. You know, it's not the same as here on Earth. If I put something down on the table, I know it's going to stay there thanks to gravity. But on the International Space Station, we want to make sure we know where everything is at all times because it can float away pretty easily. So just reporting also what was consumed, that gives the teams here in Hawthorne as well as in Houston a good look at, you know, what is also available for later use as well.
Yeah, and on the broadcast for the launch of CREW-7, NASA astronaut Jessica Meir actually mentioned, you know, how good the meals ready to eat actually are. She really gave an ode to, you know, how cool it is to be able to bring, you know, some flavors from, you know, some of the astronauts' like favorite types of food with them to the International Space Station. On Dragon, they aren't able to heat up any of the food, but they are able to hydrate any dehydrated food while on Dragon. And then once they get to the International Space Station, they actually do have the ability to warm up food and have a hot meal. And we do have another question. Again, as a reminder, we are taking questions on X with the hashtag AskNASA. Do the astronauts stay in that seated position the entire trip there? So for CREW-7, that would be for 30 hours.
Yeah. No, that doesn't sound super comfortable, and thankfully they don't have to. So like we talked about, you know, after they get on orbit, after they're out of that dynamic period of flight, the nose cone is opened, they get a call from the Corps here in Hawthorne that they can get out of their seats as well as their suits. So they're able to take their suits off and kind of be in their own comfortable clothing, whatever they've worn underneath. We ask them to put those back on shortly before we get into this approach initiation phase. So they are back in their suits right now. They are also in their seats. Of course, we don't expect anything to be off nominal in this situation, and we are moving pretty slowly, but it's still considered a dynamic period of flight because we're getting closer to the International Space Station and docking itself. We are about 15 minutes from waypoint 1. Again, our next pit stop on the way to the space station, about 220 meters above the Node 2 Zenith docking port.
Estamos então a 25 minutos do primeiro ponto, aí a 220 metros.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. C2V2 link reconfiguration is complete. Could you give us a quick comm check?
SpaceX Dragon, time check on the big loop.
We have you 5x5.
9 horas e 43 minutos no horário de Brasília. Estamos aí acompanhando então a parte de aproximação e acoplagem com a Estação Espacial
Here in that
Internacional.
conversation between the Corps and the crew, that is Shiva Bharavaj
Estamos indo
down
agora
there in
aí
Mission
ao
Control,
primeiro ponto de
Hawthorne.
checkpoint,
And they were talking
a
about
220
C2V2, that's
metros da
comm
estação.
communications for visiting vehicles. So the Dragon spacecraft and International Space Station both use this language essentially to talk with each other, and it is properly configured so they continue to have good communication between both of those spacecraft.
Se divertindo eu já não sei, né, mas eu também gostaria de estar lá, né, mas se divertindo não, porque eles trabalham muito. Né, porque eles vão fazer lá a bordo durante esse tempo de 6 meses, né, além das caminhadas que eles vão realizar na parte externa, né, da estação. Eles também vão conduzir mais de 200 experimentos, né, que tem lá a bordo da Estação Espacial Internacional. Fora as transmissões de eventos que acontecem lá também.
So currently on board the International Space Station, judging by the timeline, it looks like Woody Hoberg is now in position monitoring Dragon's approach. They can actually send
Eu vou fazer
commands from
pequeno intervalo
Dragon
aqui, mas vocês
or
ainda
from the
continuam
International Space
acompanhando as
Station to
imagens
Dragon
da
if
Dragon.
need be. If there was some reason that we needed the
Então
spacecraft
faltando
to
aí
retreat,
menos
obviously we're not tracking
de
anything
20
this morning,
minutos aí então para a
but
chegada
he'll
do
be
primeiro
monitoring
ponto de
that approach
checkpoint.
as they get closer all the way through docking, and then he'll be the person to work through the depressurization of the vestibule and make it a welcoming transition from Dragon to the space station for the 4 new crew members.
And we are currently maneuvering from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1. We are expecting to arrive at the waypoint 1 checkpoint at 5:59 a.m. Pacific time. And again, this will put Dragon directly above the International Space Station. So you could see on your screen, Dragon made its way to waypoint 0, which was directly under the International Space Station, so between Earth and the International Space Station. And now it is swinging upwards and will be above the International Space Station, basically on the space side of the station. And again, we are expecting that arrival at waypoint 1 at 5:59 a.m. Pacific time.
And we got the go from the International Space Station team that they are good to have Dragon proceed past waypoint 1. So waypoint 1, they will stop at waypoint 2 again. That's about 20 meters from the space station. That's the final checkpoint before moving in. And we expect to see them at waypoint 1 in about 12 minutes from now. Shortly after that, it moves pretty quickly. It is slow and steady, but at the same time, we're anticipating docking at 6:08 a.m. Pacific. That is 9:08 a.m. Eastern time. So just about 30 minutes from now, we should see our new crew arrive at the space station. Of course, if we needed to, we can hold at waypoint 2 for quite a while, just to make sure we have conditions on the spacecraft, on the International Space Station, any lighting conditions, just the way we want them before we move on in.
And just to recap some of our milestones, we had an approach initiation burn at 4:29 a.m. Pacific time. That's 7:29 p.m. a.m. Eastern time. As well as we did require an approach initiation mid-course maneuver, which happened at 4:56 a.m. Pacific time, 7:56 a.m. Eastern time. And again, we've passed through waypoint 0. We're on our way to waypoint 1. And as Leah mentioned, after waypoint 1 is waypoint 2, just 20 meters from the International Space Station. There will be that will be a checkpoint where they will make sure that everything is good before docking. And again, docking is autonomous. Dragon is an autonomous vehicle. So the astronauts still are just monitoring all the way until the vehicle basically latches onto the International Space Station.
We'll start hearing more and more chatter, too, as we get closer between all the crew members. And one of the call-outs that we'll hear just as the crew is about to make contact with the International Space Station is CHOP, or that stands for Crew Hands-Off Point. That's about 2 meters from the space station. At that point, the crew should not be sending any commands to Dragon. However, again, we really don't anticipate that they would be because it is an autonomous docking. So about 10 minutes away till we reach waypoint 1. Again, we're going to move right on through, head to that waypoint 2 hold point, and then we are about 20 minutes away from docking itself.
Estou novamente aqui de volta, 9 horas e 50 minutos pelo horário de Brasília, faltando pouco tempo aí então para a chegada então de fato da Dragon na Estação Espacial Internacional. Lembrando que está prevista aí a acoplagem para as 10h11 da manhã no horário de Brasília. Estamos aguardando então a confirmação da chegada então da Dragon no primeiro checkpoint a 220 metros.
This is, we may not see the docking, we may see it, but we have two bands of communication on the International Space Station. We have the KU band, which is how our video comes down. We have the S band, that's our sound and audio. The KU band antenna, we do something called KU masking. So we send commands to this antenna to not radiate in a certain area because it could reflect off of Dragon and the International Space Station. So we don't want that to radiate onto Dragon and back on the antenna itself. It can damage the antenna. It's a higher power KU link, so we don't want to damage that antenna dish if we don't have to, obviously. It can, risk the electronics inside, any tracking sensors. So we may not see docking. There is still a possibility. It just kind of depends on the location of those antennas at the time. But if we don't have video of the docking from that one location, obviously we will still have audio communications as well as comms with the crew to let us know that Dragon has arrived.
Again, if you're just now joining us, you are tuned into the CREW-7 mission. The CREW-7 crew is inside of that Dragon vehicle that you see there on your screen, and they're currently making their way to waypoint 1, which we expect to reach and pass through without a hold in about 7 minutes or so from now.
Estamos então a 7 minutos do primeiro ponto, a 220 metros da estação.
This view coming from a camera on the International Space Station of Dragon continuing its approach. Again, we are going up and above the space station, so we may eventually have some views of Dragon looking down on the station with the Earth below it. We do anticipate entering an orbital nighttime here shortly. It looks about like 10 minutes till the next sunset. Currently flying 269 statute miles over the Indian Ocean, south of Africa.
Então, lembrando para vocês, né, que a parte então da abertura da escotilha e a cerimônia de ingresso então da Estação Espacial Internacional, eu não vou fazer esta transmissão. Vocês podem, depois se quiserem, depois vocês poderão assistir lá na NASA TV, né, mas essa parte então da transmissão então da abertura da escotilha e da cerimônia então de boas-vindas, né, eu não irei fazer. Bom, só avisando para vocês.
Another view here from the International Space Station. Dragon is that big bright object pretty much in the center of your screen.
Estamos então a menos de 5 minutos do checkpoint 1. Perdemos então o contato com o vídeo agora da Estação Espacial
And this
Internacional.
view in Mission Control Hawthorne here at SpaceX headquarters.
Estamos aí novamente com as imagens do centro de controle aí da Dragon, na
So we do
Califórnia.
see, we just had some great views of Dragon from the International Space Station. We've had views of the space station from Dragon. We use the tracking data relay satellite systems as we orbit around the Earth. So we have these handover periods when the space station's satellites are transferring essentially from one to the other. That KU band, as we were talking about, that video comms coming down. We have these short handover periods within which we're, again, switching those ground stations or the satellites, making sure we pick up shortly. So these are planned or they're tracked.
Pelo horário de Brasília,
essentially.
agora às 9 horas e
We can
56
also
minutos.
extend these if needed. So sometimes we
Estamos
can
aí a
get a little
4
more time
minutos
on a
do
different satellite. Let's say
primeiro
we're on
ponto
a
de
spacewalk
checkpoint,
and we don't want to
a
have maybe
220
10-minute
metros
loss
da
of
estação.
comm. So we're
Né,
able
mas nesse
to
momento então
work
tivemos aí
with
uma
the other users of these
perda de
satellites
contato
or
já
these
esperado
ground stations and
aí
make sure
na
that we're getting
na
constant
Estação
communication
Espacial
at that
Internacional
time. So
devido
right now we
a
are
satélites de
taking
comunicação.
views from Mission Control Hawthorne on the left,
Porque
Mission
a
Control
Estação
Houston
Espacial
on the right, as
Internacional
we
então
are
utiliza
getting
satélites
into
aí de comunicação
these dynamic
para então
operations
aí
when we
mandar o
will
seu
be
sinal
seeing Dragon
para
get even
nós.
closer to the International Space Station.
And both of these teams on your screen are actively working. They're currently working in tandem as we need both the team monitoring Dragon to coordinate with the team monitoring the International Space Station, as we are basically bringing the two together as we speak.
So again, we do expect to get those communications back, those videos back from Dragon and from the space station pretty shortly. But we are tracking to arrive at waypoint 1. Again, we're passing right through waypoint 1 today. We didn't have the need to stop. Both teams polled that they are go to pass through and head to waypoint 2. But we're expecting to see or hear that call out of waypoint 1 in just a couple of minutes. Again, we're tracking
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly, and then expect Dragon to continue approach to waypoint 2.
SpaceX Dragon copies all.
All right, right on time. We are again expecting waypoint 1 arrival in just a couple of minutes. Docking could happen as soon as 10 minutes from now.
Guardando aí a confirmação da chegada então do primeiro
Also heard the
ponto.
call to the crew that the soft capture ring extension will begin
220
shortly. That's the
metros.
first
Estamos
step
então
in
acompanhando
docking.
ao
We have
vivo
soft
então a
capture,
parte então da
and this
aproximação
ring will
e
retract, pulling
acoplagem então
Dragon
da
into the
Dragon
International
SpaceX
Space Station, that international
na
docking
Estação
adapter, and then
Espacial
there are a set
Internacional.
of 12 hooks that will securely attach Dragon to the docking adapter. That's what we call hard capture. After that, we'll get into our depressurization of the vestibule.
Lembrando que depois, então, à noite, a partir das 20 horas e 50 minutos, nós vamos acompanhar ao vivo
And
aqui,
also
então,
part
a
of docking
missão
is
direto lá do
where
Japão.
the Dragon spacecraft will
Missão
actually
Sling.
connect an umbilical, set of umbilicals to the space station, basically provide power to Dragon while it's on the International Space Station.
Estamos aí com as imagens, então, dos centros de controle em Houston, no lado direito, e do lado esquerdo, aí da Califórnia, da Dragon.
So again, as we get closer to docking, if you are just joining us, this is NASA's SpaceX CREW-7 mission to the International Space Station. We have 4 members aboard Endurance today: Jasmin Moghbeli, Andreas Mogensen, Konstantin Borisov, and Satoshi Furukawa. They are scheduled for about 10 minutes from now to arrive at the International Space Station, reaching waypoint 1 here,
10
about
horas no horário
220
de
meters directly
Brasília,
above their
estamos a
docking
11
board. So
minutos da acoplagem.
We hear those Quindar tones. We like to pause to make sure that we can hear the real stars of the show. The teams in our mission control rooms talk with the crew members aboard the spacecraft.
Você está assistindo ao canal, então, UPTV.
We did expect to pass through waypoint 1 at 5:59 a.m. Pacific time. So that may be why they may be trying to establish comms here. We'll see if we can get an update here shortly.
Estamos aguardando, então, novas
That's our crew.
atualizações.
That's CREW-7. They will be arriving
Temos
here
novamente
just
a
within the next
foto,
10
então,
minutes,
da
potentially.
tripulação.
We have on the left, from the left, Jasmin Moghbeli, NASA astronaut and the commander of CREW-7.
Lembrando que a
To
nossa
her
comandante,
right,
então, é
pilot
Jasmin
Andreas
Moghbeli.
Mogensen.
Aí a primeira,
Next
né,
to
dos
him is
Estados
Satoshi
Unidos,
Furukawa,
nossa comandante
JAXA,
de
or
hoje.
Japan
missão aí vai ficar
Aerospace
6
Exploration
meses
Agency astronaut.
bordo, então, da
And
Estação
on the
Espacial
far right,
Internacional.
Konstantin Borisov of Roscosmos.
Station, Houston on the big loop.
Houston Station, with you on the big loop.
Okay, Woody, we're ready for you to monitor approach for step 3 of 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. Let us know when your review is complete and you are ready for docking.
Então foi concluído a aproximação a 220 metros da Estação Espacial Internacional. E agora estão aí, vamos nos preparar então para a parte então do segundo ponto de checkpoint a 20 metros. Então nesse momento agora vamos seguir ao segundo ponto de checkpoint a 20 metros da estação.
Communication from the Capcom in Mission Control Houston. It's Amy Dill this morning communicating with NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg on the International Space Station. Again, he's primed for monitoring this approach and docking of Dragon. So they are getting all set up on the space station side ahead of docking. Again, we're looking for that to happen around 6:08 a.m. Pacific time, so within the next few minutes.
Yeah, it's getting pretty exciting. Initial contact between Dragon and the International Space Station is expected, as Leah said, at 6:08 a.m. Pacific time, 9:08 a.m. Eastern time. Before reaching waypoint 1, mission operators conducted a go-no-go poll to allow Dragon to begin its approach to waypoint 2, which is located inside of the keep-out sphere, about 20 meters away from the space station.
As we've talked about previously, all of these visiting vehicles take this phased approach to the space station. They stop at these predetermined gates for teams to run quick checks on the vehicle performance before approaching the space station. So we know slow and steady wins the race when it comes to bringing two spacecraft together. The docking operations require a really great deal of precision to make sure we're keeping the spacecraft and obviously the crew safe.
Sim, agora falta bem pouquinho aí, falta menos de
station's docking adapter Dragon's approach will slow
faltam
and
menos
it
de
will
7
begin to
minutos
align
aí então
itself
para
with the adapter to come
acoplagem.
in for the final approach.
Dragon
A
will
acoplagem
make
então está prevista então para as 10 e 11.
initial soft contact with the adapter's soft capture ring, which will then retract to bring Dragon in for the hard capture sequence. As a further precaution, Dragon's soft capture system includes a set of rotary spring dampers that helps lessen the force of the contact between the capsule and the station. So for a little bit more of an update on what's happening on the International Space Station and in Houston, let's check in with Sandra Jones. Sandra?
Thanks, Leah. Right now, the crew on board Space Station is awake and preparing for the upcoming docking of Dragon to Space Station. Everything continuing to look good here on the Space Station side. NASA
Dragon
astronaut
SpaceX
Woody
on the
Hoberg
big
will...
loop. Soft capture ring extension is complete.
SpaceX, the Dragon copy, soft capture ring deployed complete.
De acordo com o nosso cronograma aí, faltam 6 minutos para a acoplagem.
Good words there up to the crew. So as I was saying, Hoberg will be in the station's cupola using special software to track Dragon's approach and make
Estamos aí
sure
agora
it stays in
acompanhando a
the
parte
expected
final de
zones.
aproximação
Hoberg will also be primed for
até o
hatch
segundo
opening
ponto de
operations once
checkpoint a
Dragon is
20 metros
docked.
da
He'll
estação.
start by
Estamos aí
opening the large
aguardando
hatch on node
imagens
to
de vídeo,
zenith,
né,
which
como
will
vocês
give him
podem
access
observar
into
aí
the
na tela
pressurized mating
lá no centro
adapter.
de controle de
The crew will
Houston.
then have to pressurize
Aqui
the
estamos
vestibule,
aí com a
which
perda
is
de
the small
comunicação
space
em
between the
vídeo.
hatches on Dragon and Space Station.
And
This
Dragon
was exposed
SpaceX
to
on the big
vacuum
loop
prior to
ground has
docking.
pulled go for approach 2. Please confirm visors are down and that you are ready for docking.
Nesse momento, então, foi liberado aí para a continuação da aproximação ao segundo ponto, então, ao checkpoint 2, a 20 metros da estação.
Go, and all full crew members have visors down. We are ready.
Excellent news, Dragon. Ground is going to be enabling approach shortly, and a reminder that after the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Dragon copies.
And great calls again up to the crew, letting them know everything is going smoothly. We're getting really close to docking, just confirming that they have their visors down and they can be in that configuration ahead of docking. So everything good here from the space station side. I'll toss it back over to Hawthorne so that you guys can give us
Agora
an update
falta
on
bem
your
pouquinho
end.
aí para a gente chegar, então, para chegarmos à Estação Espacial Internacional.
And we did hear the
Estamos só
Corps
sem
also
contato
call
de
out
vídeo
that
por enquanto.
also call out CHOP,
Na
which is the
Estação
crew
Espacial
hands-off
Internacional.
point. Basically, that means that the crew must be hands-off. In case of any aborts that happen during that time, it will be done by Dragon. Now, waypoint 2 is up next, and that will put Dragon only 20 meters away from the space station. From here, the spacecraft will focus on aligning its docking system with the International Docking Adapter.
Yeah, so we're getting pretty close. Right now, it looks like we are about 80 meters from the International Space Station. Again, we did not stop at waypoint 1 today. We just kept on moving through that 220-meter mark. We will hold briefly at waypoint 2. That just gives us a chance to do any final checks, make sure everybody's go before moving in for docking. Additionally, we heard previously that the soft capture ring is extended. That's what's going to make first contact with the International Space Station. It will then pull Dragon into the International Space Station's International Docking Adapter before those 12 hooks begin to do that hard capture sequence, really securely securing it to the spacecraft.
No horário de Brasília, agora são 10 horas e 8 minutos. Estamos então acompanhando a parte da aproximação final
between Dragon and the International Space
com a
Station.
Estação Espacial Internacional. Aí estamos aguardando a confirmação então da chegada aí no segundo
we are now
ponto
60 meters
de
away
checkpoint
from the
a
space
20
station.
metros da
Again,
estação.
this is really methodical. It's a very careful process as we prepare for docking, just to ensure the safety of the spacecraft, like we mentioned, of course, the crew.
Lembrando que
And again, we do not have views from the International Space Station at this time, but we have good confirmation that Dragon is on the docking axis, continues to move in as
lembrando que ainda
planned.
estamos aí sem
Sometimes we
contato
don't
de
have these
vídeo
views
com a
as
Estação
we
Espacial
are moving
Internacional.
from satellite to satellite in the Tracking Data and Relay Satellite System known as TDRS. Additionally, sometimes we just don't have great views because it's nighttime on the space station. You know, we see sunrise or sunset every 45 minutes. They are in an orbital nighttime at this point. The International Space Station flying 265 statute
Quem está
miles
chegando
south
agora,
of
estamos aí
Australia.
acompanhando ao vivo. Aí então a
Dragon now 40
parte
meters
final de
from the space
aproximação aí
station,
com a Estação
continuing to
Espacial
approach
Internacional pela
waypoint 2.
Dragon Spacex. Estamos aí nos aproximando então no segundo ponto de checkpoint a 20 metros da Estação Espacial. E aí estamos com imagens ao vivo novamente. Estamos com imagens ao vivo então da Dragon, da Estação Espacial Internacional, chegando próximos aí ao ponto então de 20 metros da Estação Espacial Internacional.
And this view from inside Dragon Endurance itself, so these are our
Então,
four
com
crew
isso, já
members. You
vou
can really see
mudar
the
aqui
commander and
nosso
pilot right now,
letreiro
Jasmin
aqui,
Moghbeli
né?
and Andreas Mogensen, just monitoring
Para
the approach
acoplagem.
on those crew display panels. Again, they are not making commands at this point. Additionally, at that 2 meters away from the space station, we hear the chop call, at which point they should not send any commands. Right now,
também eu
we
acho
are
que
at
deveria
23
usar a
meters from the
Starlink,
space station,
mas não
continuing
sei
to
se
close
iria
in on that
funcionar
zenith
para
port
a
of node
transmissão
2.
assim de
Down toward the bottom of your
eles
screen,
usam
you can see the nose cone
satélite, né?
of
Aí não
Dragon
sei se
Endeavour, which
iria
brought
funcionar
the
aí
Crew 6 astronauts
a transmissão
to the
do
International
Starlink
Space Station. So we're expecting to hear the
aí
call for
da-
waypoint 2 shortly, where
da
we will do a
estação, né?
brief
Não
pause
sei.
before moving in towards the docking
Mas
port.
talvez seria uma boa ideia. Estamos aí nos aproximando então do ponto de Checkpoint 2. Aí a 20 metros da Estação Espacial Internacional, né? Já estamos meio que atrasados aí então na parte de acoplagem, né? Que estava prevista então para acontecer às 10h11. Lembrando então que mais à noite, a partir das 20h50, nós vamos acompanhar direto do Japão a missão Slim, um veículo
Also, a cool
H2.
thing in this view is Dragon is now directly above the International Space Station, and you can tell in the view because you can see the clouds on Earth in the background.
And it looks like we have reached that 20-meter waypoint 2 mark.
Station, Houston on the big loop. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 in 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Estamos então agora no ponto 2, a 20 metros da Estação Espacial. Eles estão prontos agora para fazer a acoplagem.
All right, confirmation from Amy Dill, the Capcom in Mission Control Houston, to the crew that they are moving in for docking. So we are now 16 meters away from the International Space Station. Again, continuing slowly into the Node 2 Zenith port for docking today.
Então agora nesse momento a Dragon
Such a cool
Spacex
view, it almost feels like we're
está
on
realizando a
Dragon,
parte final agora
approaching
com a
International
acoplagem
Space Station.
na Estação Espacial Internacional. Estamos aí com essas belíssimas imagens então da Dragon. Estamos então acompanhando a parte de agora da acoplagem.
Space Station and Dragon now flying over Australia. And Dragon just 13 meters away. Again, a very methodical and careful approach to our docking port. Great views coming from Dragon this morning as we
Agora
get
pouco a
ready
pouco, bem
to welcome
devagar
4
aí,
new
então
crew
a
members
Dragon se
to the
aproxima
orbiting laboratory.
aí da sua acoplagem. 10h14 no horário de Brasília. 10 metros.
Copy, 10 meters.
Estamos a 10 metros da estação. Estamos agora a 10 metros aí. Ponto de acoplagem da Estação Espacial Internacional.
And we are just moments away from Dragon docking with the International Space Station. First will be a soft capture, and then there will be 12 hooks deploying 6 at a time to create that hard capture between the vehicle and the station.
Dragon now just 7 meters away.
7 metros.
Now 6 meters away from
6
the
metros,
Node
quer
2
dizer.
port.
5 meters.
5 metros. 5 metros.
Copy 5.
That call coming from Dragon Commander Jasmin Moghbeli, her first spaceflight to the International Space Station. Standing by for the call of crew hands-off point, or CHOP.
Estamos aguardando então o contato.
Copy CHOP.
Estamos aguardando o contato.
1 meter.
1 metro. E aí com o contato conseguimos às 10 horas e 16 minutos no horário de Brasília, Dragon Spacex da CREW-7 acopla com sucesso então na Estação Espacial Internacional.
261 statute miles over Australia.
Então, a acoplagem realizada com sucesso às 10h16 da manhã no horário de Brasília.
And that welcome coming from the crew aboard the International Space Station. Endurance has arrived with its international crew.
Acoplagem realizada com sucesso.
Begin the hard capture sequence shortly, but we are now up to 11 crew members on the International Space Station after they float through the hatch this morning.
And on the big loop, ring retraction is in progress.
Copies, ring retraction in progress.
Sejam bem-vindos, então, da tripulação da CREW-7 da Dragon Endeavour da Estação Espacial Internacional.
Now, again, we don't have views right at this moment of Dragon on the International Space Station, but we did see that docking again at 6:16 a.m. Pacific time as the International Space Station. And
lembrando que a partir então das 20 horas e 50 minutos no horário de Brasília, nós vamos acompanhar a missão lá direto do Japão, o lançamento então do SLIM, um veículo H2 direto da base de Tanegashima.
There's still a few steps to complete before Dragon is securely attached to the station.
E agora a Estação Espacial Internacional será a casa da nova tripulação da CREW-7 por 6 meses.
Beginning and then finally hard dock completing. And again, that will require 12 hooks to deploy. Again, 6 at a time will deploy to make that hard capture completion.
Of course, once we have a successful hard capture, it still is going to take a little bit before we see our crew members float through the hatch
então,
into the
quem está chegando aqui
International
no
Space
canal,
Station
quem ainda não
and
se inscreveu no
officially bring
canal,
us
se
up to that
inscreva.
total of 11, at least
Deixa
for
o
about
like
the next few
aí
days or
na
so.
transmissão.
We will first pressurize the vestibule. Well, Woody Hoberg will open the station
Agora então eles
side
vão fazer a parte toda aí de
the vestibule, the space between both of those hatches, the
a
Dragon hatch and the
despressurização
station
aí,
hatch,
né, da
bringing that
cápsula,
to the same
né,
pressure
para
as is inside
equalizar
Dragon
então a
and the space
pressurização
station.
da
It's much
cápsula
of what we are used
com
to
a,
here on
com a
Earth.
Estação Espacial Internacional, né, para que possa
Eventually they
então
will
fazer aí a
bring the
abertura
crew members aboard.
da escotilha.
Again,
Então
they
está
will give us
prevista
a welcome ceremony.
então
We'll get
para
to see them and hear
acontecer
their
a
first
meio-dia
remarks
e
about
2 no
their
horário
visit to the
de
space
Brasília.
station, maybe what the ride was like.
E a cerimônia então de
Then they will move
boas-vindas
right into work.
a
They will start
meio-dia
their
e
safety
30, né?
briefing
Mas
with
essa
the crew,
parte
making sure
aí
that
não
they
iremos fazer a
remember all their
transmissão.
training from the
Tá?
ground, get brought up to speed on the International Space Station
Nesse
itself.
momento
This is Dragon Endurance's third visit to the International Space Station, first on CREW-3, then with CREW-5, now CREW-7. It joins Dragon Endeavour.
Então, nesse
Both
momento,
docked
não,
to
né,
the
vocês
Node 2
acompanharam
module,
então às
also known as Harmony.
10h16 da manhã no horário de Brasília, então, a chegada da Dragon Spacex Endeavour
And that next
na
step,
Estação
soft
Espacial
capture ring
Internacional.
retraction, is typically expected about 4 minutes after soft capture. So we should.
And Dragon, ring retraction is complete. The docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Então, agora confirmado aí a acoplagem com sucesso. E então agora vou iniciar a
And
sequência
with perfect timing,
aí
soft
para
capture ring retraction is now complete.
a sequência então de docking, né?
As you
Sequência aí
mentioned
de
earlier,
docking, então
during this
nesse
time,
momento
we're also
será
connecting an
iniciada.
umbilical from Dragon to the station. Dragon has been using
Então a
power generated by
equalização
its solar arrays,
da
also battery power.
pressurização, né? Com
Once
a
it's connected
estação
to the
e a
International
Dragon,
Space
e
Station, it can
depois
start using
a
power
abertura da
from the station
escotilha
itself.
e a
Got a
cerimônia
great view
de
of those
boas
solar arrays
vindas.
as we were flying in this morning, and so at this point, Dragon will probably start using the station power.
E lembrando que mais
for the
tarde
remainder
estaremos
of
ao
its
vivo
time
aqui
on the space
novamente
station
a
over
partir
these das
das
6 months.
20h50 da noite, no horário de Brasília. Acompanhamos então a transmissão da missão lá direto do Japão.
And again, we do have soft capture complete for Dragon Endurance. We are standing by for the start of the hard capture sequence. This process takes several minutes, but it is the securing of 12 hooks from Dragon to the International Space Station, giving us that firm, secure hold.
MCS configured. Proceeding with hook driving.
Então lembrando sempre aí de vocês estarem se inscrevendo no canal e também de seguir a gente nas redes sociais, né, para não perder aí
And we did
nenhuma
hear that
transmissão
call out
do nosso
proceeding
canal e
with
nenhum
hook
vídeo
driving.
também.
That is the beginning of the hard capture sequence. Again,
Lembrando que
as
temos
Leo was just
vídeos
mentioning,
aí
there
relacionados
will
então
be
à
12
parte
hooks,
de matemática
and
e programação em
they will
Python.
deploy 6 at a time, so there'll be 6 hooks first.
Né,
Once
mas
those
devido
are
então a
fully
essas
latched
transmissões
to
aí
the
massivas
International
aí
Space
então
Station, then the
das
next
missões, né?
set of 6 hooks will
Então
begin
aí
to
os
deploy.
vídeos relacionados então à parte de matemática
And
e
this
Python,
process
né, estão um
should take
pouquinho
a
atrasados.
few minutes, about 4 minutes or so, until
Mas em breve
hard
teremos mais
docking is
vídeos.
complete.
Então por hora já vou.
Again, we welcomed CREW-7 to the International Space Station at 6:16 a.m. Pacific
Então
time
temos
this morning.
imagens
Here's
a
your view
bordo então da
inside
Dragon.
Dragon Endurance right now over the shoulder of our commander Jasmin Moghbeli and pilot Andreas Mogensen.
Temos imagens
It
então
was
aí da
Moghbeli's
Dragon
first trip to the
Endeavour.
International Space Station and Mogensen's second. This is also Konstantin Borisov's first trip to the International Space Station. And Satoshi Furukawa is returning as well. So he is the most experienced on this crew when it comes to days in
E
space.
temos
I
imagens
believe
do
he has
lado de fora
165
novamente.
days from previous missions.
Lembrando que a acoplagem foi realizada com sucesso às 10h16 da manhã no horário de Brasília.
Port itself. Now that we have completed that soft capture, we are obviously pulled into the space station. And those first 6 hooks are driving. We are again in the hard capture process right now. So we'll see those first 6 hooks drive, followed by the second 6, at which point they will be considered officially hard docked to the space station. We're getting some good progress on the hooks driving. It looks like the second 6 are now starting to drive. Meanwhile, on the International Space Station, again, it is a Sunday, so it is considered an off-duty day for the crew.
Bem, então nesse momento aqui vou estar encerrando a nossa transmissão de hoje, né? Vocês podem continuar acompanhando a transmissão lá pela NASA TV. Quero agradecer aqui a audiência de vocês, as inscrições. Lembrando que mais tarde então teremos missão direto lá do Japão, né, e os melhores momentos dessa missão então de aproximação e acoplagem da Estação Espacial Internacional. Desejo a todos então um ótimo dia e nos vemos à noite. Fui!
And on the big loop, hard capture is complete. Dragon, you are go to raise visors.
Dragon copies, raising visors.